I am the heir to one of the greatest kingdoms in the land. Yet my own brother betrayed me and fired an arrow into my back. That attack plunged me into a deep coma. His motive was simple. I was born to the king's first queen, met a suspicious end after being poisoned, and the true culprit was never exposed. Once the arrow struck me, I remained unconscious for 6 long years. During that time, my spirit traveled to the realm reserved for fallen heroes. Only those who reshape history in their age are permitted to enter that place. At first, they were astonished that someone so young had arrived among them. It didn't take long for them to realize I didn't belong. I lacked strength, skill, and any sign of heroism in my era. Even so, they refused to let someone like me remain unworthy in their sacred domain. They subjected me to 1,000 years of relentless training until I became equal in ability and merit to every other hero there. After a millennium passed, my physical body finally awakened from its slumber. Those very heroes who had looked down on me for centuries were now sincerely wishing me success as I departed. I gave them a faint smile before stepping into the radiance. Since that realm accepts only heroes, they will never encounter me again. After all, I have no intention of becoming one. When I opened my eyes, my frail body felt too powerless to even rise. My name is Davy Alroni, the firstborn prince of a modest kingdom. Those responsible for my mother's death and my own attempted murder should prepare themselves, because I am no longer the naive and helpless child I once was. Each day, a single maid would enter my chamber to tend to me. Her care was the only reason I survived. I chose not to reveal that I had regained consciousness, so I only moved about after she had gone. I checked the calendar, uncertain how many years had slipped by. Date struck me harder than any weapon when I saw it. 6 entire years had passed. 6 years ago that scoundrel shot me, and now he will answer for it. If I am to reclaim authority over my house, I must rebuild my body. So I attempted to use the magic I mastered in the other realm. Yet nothing happened, and I couldn't grasp the reason. In the hero's domain, a young woman instructed me in sorcery and sacred arts. She was the legendary saintess, famed for divine blessings, and she personally guided my magical training. But now the spells refused to respond. I feared that all those centuries of effort would fade away and prove useless in this world. Anyone else would have surrendered after repeated failure. Finally, it succeeded. The holy healing power manifested. Emerald light flooded the chamber, and afterward, the body that had felt ancient and broken was suddenly overflowing with vitality. Gazing upon the kingdom of my childhood, I lifted my arms with exhilaration and cried out in thanks to the sun deity. Sadly, I failed to notice the maid returning quietly behind me. She burst into tears upon seeing her young lord standing again. Later, the royal physician examined me and declared my condition astonishingly improved. He called it nothing short of a miracle. While I was being assessed, a woman stepped inside. It was Linus Barrett, the one who poisoned my mother and replaced her as queen. Accompanying her were her sons, Prince Carlos and Prince Benedict. Carlos was the one who attempted to dispose of me, believing his plan had worked. His mother asked whether I remembered the archer's face from years ago. I answered that I did, and reminded them that trying to murder royalty is the gravest offense imaginable. The guilty one turned pale, yet his mother merely scoffed and claimed the matter had long been settled. The physician sensed the tension in the air. He assured everyone I would fully recover soon, and promptly excused himself. Linus made no effort to hide her resentment, and remarked it would have been better if I had perished. I calmly asked whether my survival troubled her so deeply. Carlos commented that it was disgraceful for a prince to be attacked and lie unconscious for years. Insisted that someone so feeble could never rule. With that, they departed the room. Alone again, he realized that despite casting magic openly, none of them had sensed it. He concluded that the gap in their abilities prevented them from detecting his power. Seeing the wicked queen and her sons stirred an immediate urge for revenge. Nevertheless, he restrained himself. Perhaps the long years in the temple tempered his temper, though his desire for retribution remained. Now he needed a clear plan, yet his stomach reminded him that his first proper meal after awakening mattered more at the moment. 15 days after reclaiming his sacred strength and trimming his hair, he continued training inside his chamber. He found the hours dragged endlessly with so little activity. Still, the practice sharpened his mana control and accelerated his physical recovery. With constant healing spells, necromantic knowledge of anatomy, and medical teachings from Master Hea, restoring his body entirely posed no real challenge. He applied every lesson learned during his long isolation, and confirmed that magic greatly simplified daily life. Even so, something continued to irritate him. His devoted maid Amy insisted on following the doctor's advice, and served him soup every single day. It made him feel like a toothless elder unable to chew solid food. Amy apologized for his dissatisfaction, but said her hands were tied. Even so, he argued that a single bowl was insufficient and requested 5 more portions. Shocked by his appetite, Amy hesitated, but Davy promised he would finish it all if she brought it. He understood that such an amount was excessive for most, yet his restoration magic demanded far more nourishment. After finally eating his fill, he felt a rare sense of inner contentment. However, his heavy meals resulted in frequent trips to relieve himself. Later on, Davy reviewed several papers and stumbled upon a troubling revelation. Amy immediately apologized when he learned the truth, but he reassured her that she bore no blame. He came to understand that his enormous appetite was straining the household. Worse still, Amy turned out to be the castle's only remaining servant. Financial hardship had reduced the staff, and the vast estate was far too large for one maid to manage alone. Concerned about what lay ahead, Davy inquired about the total value of their remaining assets. Amy answered that the treasury held merely 60 gold coins. Davy remarked that if they handled the budget wisely, there should be no further financial trouble. However, Amy explained that although they were officially allotted 500 gold coins each month, in truth they received under 100. Davy questioned whether someone was siphoning money from his household. Amy denied it, so he wondered if her wages were the issue instead. By now he suspected she was barely being paid at all. Unable to deceive him, Amy confessed she now earned only a third of her former salary. During that, Davy considered that Amy might simply be too kind. Yet accepting such unfair terms was undeniably reckless. After all, maids were treated as noble property, and Amy had once been the daughter of an artist. Hardship had forced her into service as his attendant. Caring for both the prince and the vast estate alone for 6 years must have been exhausting. Or still, she had likely used most of her meager earnings to maintain his care. Because of that, Davy instructed her to withdraw the unpaid amount from his private reserves. Amy declined, insisting they lacked even tomorrow's provisions and she could not accept such money. Davy told her she no longer needed to stand on ceremony and address him so formally. He assured her he was well enough and did not require constant supervision anymore. Besides, being called prince felt overly stiff and created distance between them. He disliked that formality, since she alone had remained loyal through everything. Some time later, Davy receives a visit from an official of the Royal Finance Office. The man declares that the prince cannot access funds that have already been allocated. However, Davy finds himself distracted by the man's peculiar mustache. He also notices the scornful looks from those nearby. Even the official seems aware of the disdain in the room. Instead of bowing his head, Davy firmly tells him not to block his inquiry. He insists that he is entitled to around 500 gold coins monthly, yet receives less than half and demands an explanation. The official responds that castle upkeep expenses are deducted first, leaving only the remainder for the family. However, Davy grows increasingly annoyed by such reasoning. Onlookers agree, noting the castle's cracked floors and overgrown garden. A residence in such poor condition should not require such high maintenance costs. Davy concurs, and he also knows it is unusual for royalty to handle their own finances personally. The official replies that maintenance funds are beyond the finance office's oversight. Adds that this department manages budgets, not loan requests. Davy concludes that everyone is avoiding responsibility for the missing funds. He turns to leave, but the official asks whether he intends to approach the maintenance division. Davy answers that he expects no meaningful answers there either. Understands that officials everywhere prefer excuses and shifting blame over honesty. Before departing, he sarcastically tells the man to enjoy the coins lining his pockets. As he walks the palace halls, Davy realizes no servants remain besides Amy because low wages and mistreatment drove them away, leaving her with all the work. Soon after, Davy asks Amy to bring him a sword. She is startled by the sudden request, but he assures her he has no intention of harming anyone. Reassured somewhat, Amy goes to retrieve a blade for him. Alone, Davy reflects that he would not hesitate to cut down his enemies, since he barely considers them human. Still, he recognizes his fragile position and knows reckless action would be disastrous. As an already isolated figure, being exposed would only worsen matters. Moreover, he refuses to descend to the same cruel level as the nobles he despises. On another occasion, Davy and Amy encounter a lifeless wild boar. He casually claims he discovered it already dead. In truth, he had hunted it himself and was preparing it for a meal. Amy panics, insisting that a prince should never handle carcasses and warning him not to injure himself again. Davy replies that it will not matter as long as no one else witnesses it. He knows the king would never grant him an audience, and others are equally beyond his reach. Aware that the queen schemes against him constantly, he relies on survival skills learned as Hercules' disciple. He assures Amy the boar will serve as dinner and poses no threat. Meanwhile, inside the queen's chamber, she confides to a maid that Davy seems unlike the boy he was before the coma. Shirley responds that doctors say he can barely stand and will need over a year to fully recover. Still, the queen questions whether those reports might be false. He reminds Shirley that despite being a top Black Moon informant, in her presence she is merely a low-ranking maid. Shirley hails from the Black Moon assassins of Ron's capital. Though she claims trust, the queen remains uneasy about the prince's awakening. She notes that even the king abandoned him, and that he remains frail despite regaining consciousness. She will only rest easy once he is permanently removed from her way. Shirley cautions that her guild members operate independently, and insults could provoke retaliation. Alarmed, the queen insists she was merely voicing her concerns. She adds that she wishes she could disrupt the prince's schemes at any time. Otherwise, she warns, Shirley herself may suffer the consequences. After dismissing her, the queen decides she must eliminate the unruly hounds before making her next move, and eagerly anticipates it. In a flashback, Davy recalls being taught that controlling mana resembles threading countless needles with care and patience. His mentor warned that the brain's veins are the hardest to reach, and ignoring this could cost him his sight. Yet he often thought his masters were eccentric. Ro Ayaz seemed like a drunken priestess who could part seas with words, while the necromancer behaved more piously than she did. Despite her immense magical talent, she appeared more interested in flaunting her oversized staff. The goddess Hippocrea, called Sister Hia, promised to devote herself fully to the experimental training. She reminded him that followers sought not just to admire her, but to learn, urging Davy to apply greater effort. He assured him that trusting his teachers would allow his powers to advance. However, when he complied, he endured such a dreadful experiment that he vowed never to repeat it. Turning to the present, Amy finds him wandering outside and questions why he is roaming the gardens again. He answers lightly that the weather is delightful and the woodland garden appears refined. Tells Amy to resume her duties and inform him only if someone seeks him. Davy notes that she once would have panicked at any risky behavior, yet she seems accustomed to his habits now. Though she still declines to dine beside him, he wonders if his attempts to bridge the gap are succeeding. Anyway, he selects a secluded, tranquil spot in the garden where he can finally begin his task. There he starts meditating, focusing on drawing in the surrounding mana. He believes that with each breath of clean air, he absorbs not only oxygen but also nature's mana. This ancient practice is said to have originated from Odin and passed among the gods through ages. Even so, every practitioner has a natural limit to the mana their body can contain. To expand that capacity requires disciplined training. Yet this method gathers in days what normally takes months, making it extraordinary. He thinks that revealing this art would spark upheaval across the kingdom, but he refuses to share it. After all, it is not a skill just anyone could master. While meditating, he senses someone observing him, wonders about the identity of the hidden watcher. Realizing they have been detected, the observer quickly retreats. Davy decides not to pursue the matter, knowing that digging deeper would only invite trouble. Maintaining the image of a weak and harmless prince allows him to train undisturbed. However, another challenge remains, the issue of the mana circle. He understands that priests cannot wield arcane magic and mages cannot channel holy power. Moreover, necromancy lies beyond the reach of both. Yet he stands apart, capable of commanding priestly, magical, and necromantic arts alike, all because of his unorthodox temple mentors and two peculiar scholars. Even recalling those days leaves him uneasy. Anyway, he reflects that mages typically form a mana circle within the heart to harness power. Unfortunately, that structure cannot withstand the conflict between necromantic forces and sacred energy. If he attempted it recklessly, his heart could be shattered during the process. Known as the artery circle, this technique links the body's arteries together to forge a durable circuit resistant to mana disruption. By circulating power through his entire body, rather than just his heart, he could prevent holy and necromantic energies from colliding while gaining unexpected benefits. However, since it essentially alters the body's structure, even the slightest error would mean death. That risk alone made him reluctant to choose this path. Previously, he survived only because the temple masters assisted him, but now alone he cannot predict the outcome. As he contemplates it deeply, a vision flashes before him. He sees the images of his former masters. He reasons that even failure would be better than enduring another 1,000 years, confined in the temple. With that thought, he resolves to proceed. Later, Amy grows anxious as dinner time passes, and the prince has not appeared, which is unlike him. Though instructed not to disturb him without urgent cause, she cannot suppress her concern. If harm befell him, she fears she would be blamed. Soon after, the protagonist finally shows himself. He apologizes for worrying her. Davy comments on how strong and dependable Amy has been. Suddenly, he collapses forward against her. Amy blushes, mistaking the gesture for affection. In reality, he is simply using her for support. Exhaustion leaves him barely able to remain upright. He then crumples to the floor, alarming Amy about his condition. After some time, he awakens in bed and realizes he fainted the moment he reached her. Notices Amy asleep beside him and understands she stayed to watch over him. Once again, he feels guilty for causing her distress. Still, he senses the artery circle has formed flawlessly, allowing the three energies to course through him with an added unique effect. He now detects denser mana in the air and finds he can absorb more due to his strengthened body. With a mere snap of his fingers, even basic spells like healing feel effortless. 5 months later, Circumstances have shifted as Amy assists him with cooking ingredients. Davy claims he is satisfied with his current meals. Since stabilizing his life force, after forming the circle, mysterious deliveries of meat and vegetables have appeared at the castle. Initially, he suspected the queen's schemes, yet her flawless consistency makes that unlikely. He senses someone intends to aid him, though the benefactor remains unknown. Even after spreading his mana throughout the castle to search for clues, he finds nothing. However, this practice sharpens his awareness of anyone approaching or leaving. Amy remarks that food shortages will not trouble them for a while. However, Davy senses approaching footsteps and warns they will soon have visitors. He speculates it could be an informant sent by the queen. Back in his chamber, he prepares to receive them. Priest inspects him and inquires whether he expects a full recovery. The cleric claims that using holy power on someone bedridden for years would be risky. Davy inwardly scoffs, recognizing the priest has no intention of offering genuine healing. As a representative of God, such neglect of duty disappoints him. Therefore, he suggests the priest spare empty words and use the silver relic Priya provided to mend such minor wounds, noting he is nearly recovered already. The priest retorts that the prince lacks the knowledge to judge sacred arts. He adds that such powers belong exclusively to clergy, and even royalty should avoid selfishness like Prince Carlos. Amy rebukes Father Boris for his disrespectful tone. Offended at being corrected by a servant, he grows hostile. In anger, he strikes Amy across the face. Davy burns with concern, yet restrains himself to maintain his facade. Boris excuses his action, claiming discipline of servants protects the prince's dignity. He even remarks crudely that it is unfortunate to mar such a pretty smile. Davy nearly rises in fury to challenge him. Boris announces his departure and demands the maid escort him out. He adds that he will return in 15 days for another evaluation. Davy instructs Amy to see him to the door. Displeased, she complies with the order. Outside, Boris propositions Amy to meet him alone at night. He threatens that the prince's safety depends on her obedience. In truth, he plans to exploit her and discard her afterward without remorse. Alone again, the prince trembles with anger. Rising to his feet, he refuses to let temple-forged pride be trampled. Lady Daphne once warned him to restrain his temper. He now sees value in righteous fury. The priest's attendants are horrified when they witness the prince walking unaided. Davy believes controlled anger fuels his resolve and vitality. If idleness fosters growth, then wrath will be his driving force. Moments later, the attendants fall beneath his blade. Meanwhile, the priest boasts to Amy that he acts under the queen's command and cares nothing for a frail prince. He insists most of the kingdom shares this contempt. Therefore, shielded by the queen, he believes he can act without consequence. Davy laughs coldly, saying he now has the justification he needed. He levels his sword at the priest, calmly asks Amy what punishment awaits those who insult royalty. Shocked, the priest demands to know how the prince can stand. Davy replies that Barras remained low rank because his sacred abilities were unnecessary. He reminds Amy that she must answer when addressed, that he dislikes repeating himself. Amy states that blasphemy against royalty carries the death penalty. Without hesitation, Davy executes Barras. With dying breath, the priest warns the queen will retaliate. Davy thanks him for the warning, but declares that all who supported him will share his fate. It is not long before he confronts the queen. Upon seeing him, she calls him insane for killing a disciple of the Holy Order. Davy responds that Boris threatened his life, and he merely enforced the law. Enraged, the queen moves as if to strike him. He reminds her that before his coma, the kingdom's justice was not so twisted. He notes the king's silence and argues he committed no crime. He simply punished someone guilty of treasonous insult, unless royal blood has fallen beneath a minor cleric's status during his absence. The queen bristles at his taunts, but restrains herself. She argues he lacks proof, and that provoking the Holy Order recklessly is foolish. She sneers that he inherited his mother's stupidity, taking the chance to insult both him and his late mother repeatedly. Davy replies that slandering someone's parents is dishonorable, especially when the mother is no longer alive to defend herself. He draws his blade and directs it toward the queen. Instantly, her guards rush forward to shield her. Davy understands now why she behaves so boldly. Surrounded by protectors, she feels untouchable. He remarks that continuing would be amusing, but he will postpone it. He concludes that excessive words only hasten one's own downfall. He concludes that attempting to murder a fellow royal is no lesser crime than any other. At once, the queen understands that Davy is aware her son Carlos was behind the assassination attempt. The protagonist reflects that hoarding secrets for too long is foolish, since subtlety has never been his way. He remarks that when she struck him while he lay unconscious, she revealed her lack of grace. Furthermore, he advises her to behave with dignity, noting her chambers look anything but refined. As she frightened away the servants herself, he declares she should personally ensure the place is cleaned without delay. Otherwise, he warns that unpleasant gossip may begin circulating. Therefore, he urges the queen to consider her choices carefully from now on, because he refuses to tolerate schemes carried out behind his back. After he exits her quarters, the queen vents her fury on her guild attendants, screaming uncontrollably. In her rage, she nearly demolishes the entire room. Now grasping the prince's resolve, she becomes even more determined to eliminate him, though she wants him to suffer first. Soon whispers spread, claiming the prince slew the priest out of madness after awakening. However, this outcome was precisely what Devi anticipated, as once the queen learned of it, the palace soon followed. He lacked the full story, and only heard that the prince executed the priest. With much of the palace loyal to the queen, Davy's image deteriorates further. Yet not everything unfolds negatively. Amy informs him that additional provisions have once again appeared. Although Davy insists he no longer requires medicinal plants, Amy suggests someone must recognize his kindness and seeks to repay it. Davy asks whether she truly views him as virtuous. Without hesitation, she answers affirmatively. Even after witnessing him kill, Amy's faith in his character remains unchanged. Davy realizes she is remarkable beyond measure. During their talk, a figure approaches. It is Bisfuz, the Grand Chamberlain overseeing royal affiliates, announcing he has brought the offenders per the Queen's order. He reports that they embezzled palace funds, and some attempted escape before capture. Davy inquires about the usual penalty, and Bisfuz replies that typically both culprits and their families would face execution. Yet the final decision rests with the prince. Davy remarks that rumors labeling him ruthless have been spreading lately. He wonders aloud if he should live up to that reputation. The accused fall to their knees, begging desperately for mercy. He orders the lawful punishment to proceed, but commands they be confined without sustenance for 9 days first. Though the queen initiated this, Davy intends to twist it to his benefit despite his distaste. Later, he requests new staff be recruited while Amy remains his aide with increased pay, and also asks whether he may see his father. Bisfuz answers negatively, prompting Davy to question whether the refusal came from the king or the Chamberlain claims ignorance, stating he merely relays messages. Advises patience, assuring the request will be approved eventually. Davy responds that he will remember that. Chamberlain prepares to depart. Before leaving, Davy mentions he consumed all the delivered food, therefore no longer requires additional herbs. Bisfuz feigns confusion, implying perhaps blessings follow the prince's character, then notes another visitor awaits and excuses himself. Though he denies involvement, Davy is convinced Bisfuz secretly supplied the goods, as the head of staff has known him since childhood, revealing another ally besides Amy. Still, Davy shifts focus to the upcoming guest. Amy soon reappears, announcing the arrival of the 4th prince and 2nd princess. The princess rushes into his chamber immediately. Only Al Round beams with joy at seeing her brother. Overcome with excitement, she leaps onto him and knocks him down. Amy panics at the sight. Moments later, her twin brother enters, cautioning her to behave. Ari's Al Roam, the 4th prince, expresses relief at Davy's recovery. King Cryan's Al Roan fathered children with 3 different women. They include the current queen, his first mistress Anisha, and second mistress Alice. While Alice aligns closely with the queen, Anisha remains neutral and somewhat isolated. Baris and Winley are Anisha's offspring and thus Davy's half-siblings, with Baris composed and courteous, whereas Winley behaves impulsively. She teases Baris for acting stiff, reminding him he was the one desperate to see Davy. As they squabble, Amy checks on Davy's condition. Davy recalls rumors that the twins lead a band of thieves, and their unruly conduct makes it plausible. Nonetheless, they are family and heed his words. Given his circumstances, that loyalty is invaluable. Once seated, they note 6 years have passed since they last met. After his coma, the twins were sent far away. At only 8 years old, they had no choice but obedience. Additionally, their sister Dana was dispatched abroad due to the queen's machinations. Nisha struggled to shield her children, as the queen oversees all mistresses' affairs. Returning to their talk, they mention seeing the king, and Davy asks about his health. Baris replies that though weary, their father is well, and Winley is stunned Davy has yet to meet him. Baris comments that the palace appears poorly maintained. Davy explains funds were stolen, but assures them he has addressed it and stability will return. Even so, Baris finds the situation intolerable. While Davy lay unconscious, others exploited him. Baris intends to petition the king for justice. However, Davy stops him, insisting he will resolve it personally without troubling their father. Observing their support, Davy wonders if his fortunes are truly improving. Setting that aside, he remarks on Winley's magical talent and asks about their artistic pursuits. Winley explains she often protects Baris, who lacks coordination and rushes about carelessly. She jokes that he is unfit for fencing contests. Offended, Baris retorts, and the twins resume bickering. After they settle down, Winley presents him with a letter. She explains that the 5-year fencing tournament is imminent. This year it will be hosted in Palisti. Reading it, Davy senses the gravity of the event. Bari suggests Davy seize the chance to travel beyond the realm and mentions consulting their father. Winley corrects him, saying she arranged it and the king granted Davy permission. She describes Polisti as a magnificent water city, declaring she will accompany him regardless of objections. Davy concedes he cannot deny his siblings and agrees to journey with them. He reflects that he has never ventured abroad, and the experience might prove refreshing. The thought of enjoyment lifts his spirits as anticipation grows. Meanwhile, in the royal hall, Bisfuz observes that Bari's nears 14, nearly of age. He assumes the siblings are presently discussing the tournament, reassures the king that the young prince has matured considerably. Bisfuz commends Davy's composure and insight, amazed by his development. King replies that even the chamberlain's acknowledgement is enough, and remarks sorrowfully on how unfortunate the circumstances are. Back in his chamber, Davy stood gazing at his mother's portrait, his eyes filled with deep respect and longing, not only for her memory, but also because his room was finally tidy, instead of resembling an abandoned room. Thanks to Bisfuz and the newly hired staff, the palace had been swiftly restored to its proper grandeur. Amy was just as delighted as Davy, pleased to see order and dignity returning at last. However, Davy would not remain to enjoy it since he was preparing to depart. Amy assured him that everything he requested had been packed. Before leaving, he entrusted her with a bottle. Then he joined the twins as they set out for the kingdom of Palis. Continental fencing tournament was renowned for captivating the entire continent. It carried immense prestige, and with Bari's competing, Davy was allowed to accompany him in hopes that victory would weaken Carlo's standing. Davy could not understand why the queen approved Bari's participation. Perhaps she doubted his chances. Perhaps she was scheming again, something Davy intended to watch closely. Before departure, the king appeared in public to offer his blessing. The crowd erupted in cheers, for Crine's Alrone was beloved by his people. To Davy, he was merely the man who happened to be his father. It was their first meeting since his awakening, as the king had avoided him for half a year. The king asked Baris whether he felt prepared. Baris confidently declared he would honor the kingdom with his performance. The king then wished him a safe return. Rather than linger in conversation, he simply turned away. Before leaving, he briefly told Davy he was glad to see him recover. He quickly asked if Davy felt all right. Internally, he answered yes, refusing to waste emotion on the king. A royal envoy then announced that Bari's participation was vital, and curfew restrictions would be lifted during the event. Davy reflected that the king seemed nothing like his former heroic self. He appeared worn and drained, like an old man burdened by unseen troubles. Regardless, the group began their journey. Along the way, Baris noticed Davy's distant expression and asked if something troubled him. Davy replied that he simply was not accustomed to such long travels. Winley lifted the wine Davy had prepared and suggested it might brighten the trip. She praised its fragrance and asked where he obtained it. Davy explained it had been left by their mother, though he never learned why. Baris questioned whether it was wise to drink something so precious. Davy smiled and said celebrations were the right time to open it. Winley remarked that he had changed, as he once guarded every keepsake from their mother. He replied that wine exists to be enjoyed, not hoarded, and raised a toast to their happiness. Later, they made camp along the road. Baris explained they would resume travel at dawn, since one more day remained. He noted he had managed to keep Winley calm for the moment. Excessive drinking certainly contributed. Baris recalled Davy once expressing a wish to camp outdoors, pointed out that this journey fulfilled that wish and mentioned shortening the ceremony to ease Davy's burden. Davy privately thought horseback travel would have been faster, as the slow pace tested his patience. He reflected on how much had changed recently, and wondered what other unseen shifts had occurred. Baris soon retired for the night. Amy approached Davy and suggested he rest as well. Davy replied that the moonlight looked unusually beautiful. He also sensed stronger magic in the air and wished to take advantage of it. During the night, a guard explained that the red moon is called Cyrus and the blue Cruz, one marking beginnings and the other endings, prompting Davy to comment on his knowledge. The man shrugged, saying even children know such lore. He joked he would rather be speaking to a woman. At that moment, another guard approached and asked who he was talking to. Startled, the man realized he had been alone and wondered if he had spoken to a spirit. Davy chuckled quietly, knowing he had turned invisible to observe them. Noting that 4 guards were elite swordsmen, he trusted they could manage minor threats, such as a sudden midnight assault by 20 attackers. From a distance, he detected ninjas advancing after waiting for the camp to sleep. He suspected this was the queen's attempt to eliminate the royals in one strike. Davy wished to avoid revealing himself to prevent suspicion, yet he could not ignore the danger. Moreover, those who witnessed his strength rarely survive. Without a proper blade, he prepared to engage. He recalled his master, teaching that any object can serve as a weapon. To him, battle holds no rules and weapons are merely extensions of the body. With enough imagination, even cloth could become a lethal blade. Armed with a simple stick, he sprang forward. He mocked the attackers for their lack of skill. Out of curiosity, He asked if the queen had sent them. They remained silent, so Davy suggested they leave if they had nothing to say. Knowing they would persist, he launched another assault. As he fought, he pondered what the queen hoped to gain by risking such chaos. Perhaps another hidden motive guided her. Returning to combat, he struck down several foes, taunted the rest, offering them a chance to flee, and deliver a message that Prince Davy would one day ruin everything she built. Faced with his overwhelming strength, the survivors attempted retreat. Davy refused to let them escape. He pursued them, ridiculing their slowness. One by one he cut them down, declaring no one escapes him easily. Afterward, he scoffed at their poor performance. He remarked that patience defines true ninjas, and they lacked it. It was, after all, a principle of their own creed. Suddenly more ninjas emerged from hiding. Davy dismissed their tactic as ineffective. He sensed one attempting to slip away, while others stayed behind to stall him. After dispatching the remaining fighters, he commented that they were hardly worth his effort. He had prepared contingencies long before their arrival. Unless they fled beyond the continent, none could outrun him. He unleashed a formless magical strike that struck the fleeing ninja and erased his soul instantly. We found the method harsh. His masters taught him to finish battles completely. They also instilled in him that mercy toward those who seek your death is folly. So he ensured none survived while keeping his identity hidden. Later, word of the failed ambush reached the queen. Shirley informed her that every candle tied to her disciples' lives had gone dark. During this, the queen realized that every single one of her forces had been wiped out. Even so, she demanded to know what had become of the intended targets. Shirley answered that the group had likely just set foot inside the kingdom of Polisti. Enraged, the queen pressed Shirley on how she could possibly fail against merely 3 children and 5 knights. She went on to mock the Dark Moon Guild's reputation, saying they were far from invincible since they not only failed the mission, but also lost 20 of their own. Shirley explained that they were still gathering details, yet the evidence suggested Prince Davy had received assistance from someone. The queen sneered at the idea, questioning who would ever side with that foolish boy. She commanded Shirley to investigate thoroughly, vowing to personally punish anyone bold enough to oppose her. Moreover, she reminded her subordinate that she had partnered with the guild solely because they assured her they would never fail. Consequently, if such incompetence happened again, the agreement would be voided, and as queen she would crush the guild entirely using her authority. Meanwhile, with the main group, Winley caught sight of the Polisti kingdom and excitedly informed her brothers. Davy felt satisfied, knowing they had finally reached their destination. He understood that the Water Kingdom was essentially a modest city-state. Still, its ancient architecture and scattered ruins ranked among the continent's most breathtaking sights. Once they arrived, Davy paused to admire the scenery before him. The look on his face, his brother could tell he was genuinely pleased. Davy agreed, remarking that this city was famous for hosting the renowned swordsmanship tournament. Grand Stadium served as the battleground, attracting crowds eager to watch warriors and even monsters fight for survival. Winley noted that this year 8 contenders would compete as representatives of their respective nations. Davy quickly grasped that the event was essentially a clash of national pride. Furthermore, only participants under 20 were allowed, meaning it was a stage for rising talents rather than seasoned veterans. Winley also commented that the Round Kingdom had sent a fool as their delegate, prompting her brother to ask whether she should encourage him instead of belittling him. As for Davy, believed Barris possessed solid intermediate skills, ranking just shy of master level, which was remarkable given his youth. Then Winley revealed that the Fallen Kingdom's representative was none other than the famed Sword Princess. This caught Davy off guard and made him realize how much the world had shifted during his coma. He did know that Alina was Fallen's only princess among 9 princes, and that she was especially favored by Crown Prince. Barris pointed out that her reputation stemmed not only from talent, but also from wielding a sacred blade. Winley explained that the weapon was Caldera's, beloved sword of the sword god, and a masterpiece forged over 1,000 days. Davy felt a wave of nostalgia, as he had not heard that name in quite some time. Hares the sword god had once instructed him during his days at the temple. Though indolent by nature, Hares possessed extraordinary technique and never missed a chance to brag about his weapon. He often left traces of his presence wherever he traveled, yet recalling him still felt oddly surreal to Davy. At that moment, a young lady brushed past him. Something about her made him pause, and when questioned about why she stopped, she insisted it was nothing of consequence. Later, Davy spoke with his siblings about the blade, remembering that it housed a spirit born from the Creator's affection for the world. It was revered as divine for good reason, and he wondered why after centuries it had selected Alina as its new bearer. Barris mentioned that Alina's renown had another cause as well. According to him, she ranked among the 5 unmatched beauties of the continent, though Davy doubted appearance had influenced the sword's decision. After supper, he changed into the attire Amy prepared and asked whether she had anything less extravagant. The maid answered that this was already the most modest option available. Even if he was not a contestant, he remained royalty and had to present himself appropriately. Soon the festival evening began, and the twins finished preparing as well. Davy praised his sister's look, but Barris warned him not to exaggerate or she might take his words seriously. In response to that tease, he earned a sharp stomp on his foot. Winley then guided Davy toward the dance floor and invited him to join her. At that same celebration, another princess received an invitation to dance. However, she felt uneasy amid the loud festivities, while her escort reminded her that the gathering was meant for young nobles to mingle, and asked how her earlier trip to the village had gone. She replied that it was tolerable considering how uncivilized the place seemed. Before the tournament commenced, a formal banquet and ball had been arranged for the aristocracy to socialize. Davy showed little interest in the revelry, and instead observed the attendees with the competition in mind. Most of those present were youths due to the age restriction, though older guardians like himself accompanied them. Barris by far attracted the most admiration. Without making any effort, he drew the attention of numerous young ladies. Davy assumed his brother's swordsmanship explained the interest, yet he still found it intriguing to see Barris socializing. Winley also garnered plenty of attention, but Davy preferred to remain distant and evaluate possible rivals. Overwhelmed, Barris attempted to signal for assistance to escape the crowd. When he searched for his siblings, though, they were already dancing together and had unknowingly abandoned him. Davy hoped his brother would simply enjoy being young rather than cause unnecessary trouble. Winley admitted she never expected to share a dance with Davy one day, and added that she had inadvertently stepped into high society. Still, she felt slightly disappointed, saying that if not for Davy's circumstances, he too could have entered the tournament. After all, his ability with a blade was undeniable. Davy responded that she was overstating things, insisting that talent alone would not allow him to reach true expert level. He countered that talent was merely a myth if one failed to work diligently, as without effort it meant nothing. Even so, Davy confessed he had little concern for such ambitions. Rather than fame, he longed for a quiet existence, which made his sister tease him for sounding like an old man. But as they continued talking, a man approached and remarked that a ball like this was the perfect setting to reunite with Princess Winley. Davy immediately fixed his gaze on the stranger, curious about his identity and how he was acquainted with Winley. Winley herself appeared uneasy at the man's sudden intrusion. However, the stranger shoved Davy aside to stand closer to her. He then politely requested the princess grant him a private audience. Winley addressed him as Prince Valentine and explained she was currently speaking with her brother, so she could not oblige. Valentine clearly disliked being refused. Nonetheless, he formally introduced himself as Valentine du Boltus, 7th Prince of the Boltus Kingdom. Davy returned the courtesy by stating his name as Davy Alrone. Valentine attempted to continue chatting, but Davy cut in saying he was merely accompanying his siblings. Hearing that, Valentine wished him an enjoyable stay, then redirected his focus back to Princess Winley, declaring he intended to claim victory in the tournament in honor of her beauty, and urging her to watch him closely in the arena. Winley replied that boasting about victory before competing was disrespectful to the other entrants. Valentine insisted that speaking honestly could not be considered discourteous. Irritated, she reminded him her twin would also fight, and his words only demonstrated how much he underestimated everyone else. With that, she left the prince's side and walked away with Davy. Observing her composure, Davy understood his sister was capable of handling herself. Even so, he suspected the conceited prince would not accept the slight so easily. Indeed, Valentine rose and reached out to seize Winley by the arm. Witnessing this, Davy decided his patience with the insolent noble had run out. He swiftly disrupted the prince's balance and stripped him of his weapon entirely, leaving him stunned. Davy warned that Valentine should refrain from laying hands on his sister. He further remarked that the prince was fortunate no bones were broken, so he could still compete without hindrance. However, this remark only fueled Valentine's anger. He calmly removed a glove from his hand and flung it straight at Davy's face. By doing so, he formally issued a challenge for a duel. Winley protested that the prince was behaving beyond his limits. Valentine maintained that he acted to defend his honor as a knight. At that instant, another voice interjected, criticizing Valentine for making such a scene while claiming to value honor. The speaker was the same princess who had appeared earlier. She explained that she had been watching Valentine's behavior and questioned whether he truly believed he could reclaim something that had never belonged to him. The moment Davy laid eyes on the princess, he felt a strange familiarity and was startled to see her there. Eris the sword god was an ancient champion who established the Falun Empire, which later rose to become one of the continent's 3 dominant powers. Everyone knew that Harris had first wielded the sacred blade calderas and created the legendary claymore technique that was eventually lost. Legends claimed masters of that art could summon tidal waves with a single slash, though Davy felt that sounded exaggerated even for Harris. Returning to the present, he noticed that the princess bore an uncanny resemblance to Harris. However, she was Alina of the Falun Empire, cherished daughter of the emperor, Yet Davy could not shake the feeling that she looked strikingly like the sword hero. Harris had been undeniably handsome, but he was still a man, so Davy dismissed the absurd thought that he could have altered himself into a woman. Lost in that thought, the princess stepped closer and inquired about what he had just muttered. Davy quickly apologized, claiming he had been speaking to himself and meant no offense. He attempted to brush off the matter and asked her to forget it. At the same time, Alina reprimanded Valentin for his conduct. Davy privately admitted that Alina of Fallen possessed breathtaking beauty. Valentin, however, struck him as neither attractive nor charismatic, only an overbearing and unpleasant noble. Alina calmly stated that if Valentin truly valued knightly honor, he should apologize to those he had insulted. The look on the prince's face made it obvious he had no desire to comply. Davy thought that a man so swollen with pride would never bow his head so easily. With that in mind, he announced that he would accept the duel Valentin had proposed. Alina questioned his seriousness, arguing that the clash was pointless and there was no need for him to agree. Davy replied that it was his choice, and since Valentin had not withdrawn the challenge, he would face him immediately. Soon after, Davy picked up a wooden practice sword, noting how long it had been since he last held one. Varys stepped forward and warned that even if Davy was capable, his opponent was an official competitor in the tournament, something Davy already understood. Seeing their worried expressions, he offered both siblings a reassuring smile. Valentin seized the moment to mock him, saying that if Davy intended to wave his sword like a novice, he should surrender now and spare his family the anxiety. He even added that if Davy knelt and admitted defeat, he might graciously forgive him. Irritated by the insult, Varys moved to stand up for his brother. Davy stopped him calmly, remarking that deeds would prove more than arguments ever could. Valentin boasted that he would never lose, and declared that if by some miracle Davy prevailed, he would kneel and acknowledge him as superior. Davy accepted the terms, warning him not to retreat from his words when defeat came. Then considered carefully how he should approach this match. After all, most people still saw him as a frail prince barely awakened from a long coma. He had no intention of revealing his true ability in a trivial confrontation like this. That resolution, the duel commenced. Valentin assumed Davy was frightened. He expected Davy to strike first and mistook his stillness for hesitation. Hearing that remark, Davy suddenly formed a plan. He lunged forward with sudden speed toward his opponent. The unexpected charge left Valentin momentarily stunned. Yet instead of striking him directly, Davy deliberately slammed his blade into the ground and acted as though the weapon had slipped from his grasp. The wooden sword then bounced and smacked straight into Valentin's face. The prince received the blow squarely. Davy feigned embarrassment as if the mishap were accidental, though in truth it had been carefully planned. He toppled his opponent without displaying even a fraction of his real strength. Valentin felt deeply disgraced, having been knocked down by what appeared to be a careless blunder. Onlookers quickly whispered and mocked, calling his fall humiliating. Enraged and flushed, Valentin forced himself back onto his feet, determined now to crush Davy without mercy. Davy casually remarked that with such dramatic flair Valentin would need far more training before defeating anyone. Valentin launched himself at Davy with full force, aiming to wound him decisively. Despite his efforts, not a single strike found its mark. Meanwhile, Davy moved effortlessly, not even breathing hard. As the tide turned unmistakably against him, Valentin began to panic, unable to comprehend why he was being overwhelmed. In a desperate and frustrated attempt to recover, he was struck down again, collapsing before the watching crowd. Beyond defeat, he had to endure jeers not only from Davy, but also from spectators who had now witnessed him falter repeatedly. Unable to bear it, he shouted for silence, declaring he would not tolerate another word. Davy observed that his rival had suffered more than a simple loss. He had been shamed publicly by the very prince long thought weak and insignificant. Davy knew his edge came from employing the drunken stance, a style that confused opponents by mimicking the clumsy unpredictability of an intoxicated fighter. This peculiar method had been devised by Doc Gajan, renowned across the pantheon as the greatest drunk among heroes. It was further refined by Hares, who delighted in crafting the most devious and unpleasant fencing forms imaginable. Davy was familiar with it because he had encountered its creator during his temple training. Doc Gajan often bragged shamelessly about inventing the technique, yet he never denied how cruel and underhanded the style truly was. Davy had been warned that such a method should be reserved only for foes who deserved humiliation. So he understood from the outset that even its founders regarded it as taboo, due to overwhelming power or lethal precision, but because of its capacity to mislead and toy mercilessly with an opponent. Therefore, it was designed not for honorable combat, but to disgrace someone thoroughly before an audience. Exploiting openings as the enemy attacked, it delivered decisive counters, making it perfect for that humiliating purpose. Under its influence, the opponent became like a rat trapped in an endless maze. The larger the crowd, the harsher the embarrassment inflicted by the style. Precisely the scenario unfolding at that moment. After toying with Valentin for some time, Davy wondered whether fate favored him or whether the prince was simply incompetent. He also discovered he genuinely enjoyed using the technique, feeling it matched his temperament and made combat almost playful. Valentine, however, found no amusement in the exchange. Consumed by fury, he unleashed his power, intent on erasing Davy entirely. Benedict protested that this was merely a sparring match and questioned whether Valentine had lost his senses by invoking such force. Yet Davy realized he had cornered his rival into this extreme reaction. Considering the danger, he knew that surviving such an attack could not be dismissed as mere luck. Besides, he was aware that many eyes had been scrutinizing him since the duel began. Valentine seized the moment and rushed forward with ferocious intent. Just as he attempted to land a decisive blow, he was caught off guard once again. Davy slipped aside smoothly, evading the strike. In doing so, he astonished his opponent and skillfully reversed the momentum of the battle, throwing Valentine off balance and sending him crashing down. At that instant, the proud prince recognized Davy's overwhelming superiority. Nevertheless, Davy acted as though it were accidental, pretending he had stumbled and by chance disarmed his foe. The crowd responded with scorn toward Prince Valentine. Regardless of the murmurs, Davy was declared the victor of the duel. Spectators began questioning everything, wondering if Valentine had always been so pitiful and whether Davy was truly the frail prince who had lain in a coma. Davy modestly claimed he could barely grip his sword properly and that sheer luck had tipped the scales in his favor. Finley joked that he must have exhausted an entire lifetime of fortune in that single day. What entertained many in the hall turned out to be nothing but a pointless spectacle in Alina's eyes. She considered everything she had just seen utterly foolish. Without another word, she simply turned around and walked away. Davy observed her reaction and concluded that the princess had a rather distant and icy demeanor. Some time afterward, his brothers scolded him, saying he had acted recklessly and stirred up unnecessary chaos. Davy argued in his defense that things had resolved without harm, and there was no need to dwell on it. Benedict pointed out that Davy had been fortunate, since Valentine was known for his volatile temperament, and the situation could easily have escalated into something deadly. He reminded him that the twins had crossed paths with Valentine before and had seen his abilities firsthand, and that afterward he had begun pursuing Winley. Although they believed Valentine would likely keep his distance from Winley from now on, Benedict still cautioned Davy not to repeat such actions, since luck would not always protect him. In reply, Davy clasped his brother's hand firmly. After displaying his strength through that grip, he told Benedict to stop treating him like a fragile invalid. Nevertheless, he promised to follow his younger brother's advice and avoid causing further trouble. Davy reflected that it was only a matter of time before his brothers discovered his real capabilities, so hiding them no longer seemed necessary. Winley felt reassured knowing that Davy was capable of defending himself. After all, he had exploited the moment when Valentine was adjusting the weight of his sword to catch him off guard. Even Davy had not anticipated how thoroughly his opponent would be disgraced. As for Valentine, he remained consumed by rage, smashing items in his chamber while servants attempted to soothe him. He proclaimed that as the future prince of the Baldy era, he would never accept humiliation before fellow nobles. He prided himself on projecting brilliance and unmatched talent, and there were few desires in the world beyond his reach, which made nearly everything seem attainable to him. That was precisely why he had set his sights on Princess Winley, intended to make her his wife, valuing not only her beauty, but also the advantage of gaining her skilled swordsman brother as a subordinate through marriage. Moreover, Valentine had already coordinated his plans with Queen Round and believed everything was arranged perfectly, which only deepened his frustration when an unexpected obstacle appeared. Worst of all, his reputation had been severely damaged. As a result, his fury burned more fiercely than ever. While wrecking his surroundings, he felt an overwhelming urge to erase Davy for the disgrace he had suffered. Yet as he spoke of killing him, an unfamiliar voice questioned whether that was truly his deepest wish. Startled by the disembodied voice, he demanded to know who was there. The woman's presence materialized, offering to grant him the power to fulfill his desire. Still bewildered, he asked again who she was. She introduced herself as Shariat and instructed him to remember that name. Drawing closer, she urged Valentine to place his trust in her, assuring him that only through her could he achieve what he longed for. Eventually, the long-awaited day of the tournament arrived. Amy informed Davy that his brother was preparing to step into the arena. Davy appeared eager, though not necessarily because of the battle itself. He admitted there was still much for him to accomplish. The maid inquired about what he meant. Davy brushed it off as idle thoughts and said he was ready to go, leaving other concerns for later. Benedict had already taken his position on the field. Winley observed from the stands with focused attention. The entire stadium buzzed in anticipation of the upcoming clash. However, Benedict's opponent turned out to be none other than Valentine, who after his earlier humiliation was determined not to suffer defeat again. Davy entered the arena. he felt the electrifying atmosphere. Grateful that Benedict's match was scheduled in the afternoon, since he had skipped the morning bouts due to feeling slightly unwell. Rejoining Winley in the stands, he immediately asked whether he was feeling any better. Davy chose not to reveal details about his condition. He reflected that completing his mana circle at a young age granted him strength capable of defeating stronger foes. However, his transformation remained incomplete, and excessive use of power occasionally left him with stomach discomfort. He thought that if it persisted, he might have to rely on sacred energy to soothe them. Soon Benedict stepped into the arena amid roaring cheers. Davy could clearly see how admired his brother was by the crowd. Until that moment, he had not known who Benedict would face, but upon seeing Valentine enter, he found it ironic that the same adversary would confront two prominent members of Rome, and he had expected such a meeting to occur much later. Before the duel began, the judge announced that the blades were dull, and that channeling mana through them to harm an opponent was strictly forbidden. Watching closely, Davy remarked that public opinion carried considerable weight. Winley worried her twin might overextend himself and suffer injury. Davy reassured her that Benedict was experienced and unlikely to act carelessly. Therefore, he was confident nothing serious would occur. Returning to the match, the judge instructed both fighters to advance. Then, several mages erected a protective barrier encircling the arena. Valentine, who had remained silent until now, maintained intense concentration. Benedict, too, displayed complete seriousness as he prepared for combat. That the signal was given, and the duel officially began. Both warriors rushed toward each other without hesitation. Reflecting on his previous encounter, Davy judged Valentine to be erratic and hard to predict with a blade. Benedict, by contrast, relied on raw power to deliver crushing blows, and when comparing styles, Davy believed his brother held the advantage. Furthermore, he doubted Valentine could endure the relentless force of Benedict's strikes. Yet events unfolded differently than expected. When struck at, Valentine did not evade but chose to block directly, contradicting assumptions about his usual tactics. Spectators began murmuring that the match might prove far more thrilling than anticipated. Davy thought it strange since Valentine had fought differently before, and improving so drastically overnight seemed impossible. Even prodigies required time to refine physical mastery. Still, he believed that continuous pressure from Benedict would eventually exhaust Valentine. Despite his calm analysis, Davy sensed something unsettling beneath the surface. Winley also remarked that she had never seen Benedict move with such speed. He concluded that if her brother had advanced so much, she too would need to train harder. Davy likewise noticed the clear improvement in Benedict's technique. Since childhood, Benedict had aspired to become a knight. After 6 years, Davy could plainly see the results of that unwavering dedication. However, he realized he knew very little about Valentine's current abilities. Observing how differently Valentine fought, Davy felt as though he were facing an entirely new person. That uneasy sensation returned, as if danger lurked just ahead. Noticing his troubled expression, Winley asked whether he was feeling all right. In the arena, Benedict carefully studied his opponent's movements. He had not anticipated Valentine countering his longsword so effectively. Though impressed by the resistance, he remained cautious and refused to lower his guard. Rather than prolonging the exchange, he resolved to finish the battle swiftly. Gathering his strength, he prepared a decisive strike. As he unleashed the powerful blow toward Valentine, Valentine inexplicably remained still, almost inviting the strike. The blade hovered dangerously close to his face. Benedict was baffled by such reckless behavior. However, at the final instant, he redirected the attack, knowing he could not seriously injure his foe without facing penalties. He attempted a follow-up strike, designed to avoid causing harm. Yet unbeknownst to him, this hesitation was precisely what Valentine had anticipated. Before Benedict could launch another strike, Valentine infused his blade with mana. Fully aware it violated the tournament rules, he recklessly endangered Benedict's life. Previous evening, Benedict had trained tirelessly, determined not to be eliminated from the competition. Later that night, Davy showed up to speak with him, joking that his restlessness was keeping him awake. Davy mentioned Winley was already asleep and questioned why Benedict was still up, and his brother admitted he couldn't rest, so he decided to practice. Benedict confessed he felt a trace of anxiety about the fight ahead. Even so, he remained confident that victory would be his. Davy reassured him warmly, insisting there was no chance he would lose and no reason for concern. Watching Benedict's steady mana circulation, Davy observed that his brother's energy was smooth and refined. He even contemplated giving him a subtle enhancement, and though discovery would cause uproar, Davy was prepared to accept that risk. He asked Benedict to pause, noting the tension in his shoulders and offering to give him a massage. Yet while kneading his muscles, Davy discreetly transferred a portion of his own mana into his brother, cautioned him beforehand that it might sting slightly. Instantly, Benedict felt a jolt surge through his entire body. Davy commented that staying up all night was likely the cause, and advised him to rest properly. Internally, Davy reflected that the technique stimulated the recipient's mana core, triggering a chain reaction that amplified the flow of energy throughout the body. And although it appeared simple, it required mastery and was banned in most regions. He vaguely recalled a land where this art was allowed, and practitioners were renowned for their exceptional massages. As the infusion ended, Davy softly uttered an incantation. Startled, Benedict asked what language that had been, but Davy ignored the question. When it was finished, Benedict collapsed onto the floor, body overwhelmed by the sudden influx of heightened mana. Davy knew it wouldn't grant immediate advantage in battle, yet it would accelerate his brother's long-term growth. Still, he could not leave him sleeping there, as that would raise suspicion despite offering extra safety. Benedict grumbled that Davy treated Winley more gently and would surely carry her if she were exhausted, but Davy dismissed the claim and ordered him to rest at once, or he threatened to repeat the massage with even greater intensity. Without hesitation, Benedict hurried back to his room, content that his brother would now be more secure. Davy also went to bed, returning to the present. When Valentin's mana-charged strike hit, the protective shield Davy had embedded activated instantly. The barrier flung Valentin's sword away on contact, preventing him from pressing the assault further. Spectators quickly realized that Valentin's weapon was enhanced unnaturally. They also noticed a shimmering mana barrier safeguarding Benedict. From the VIP section, Winley cheered loudly, believing her brother had triumphed. When she looked beside her, Davy was no longer seated there. Down in the arena, Benedict had still suffered injury, despite the shield's protection. The overseeing mages promptly halted the match and restrained Valentin. He was disqualified for breaching the rules and further penalized, as officials warned his actions might provoke conflict between nations. A formal report was immediately dispatched to the Kingdom of Boltus. Valentin's attendant pleaded for leniency, urging his master to speak in his defense. Instead, Valentin seized the servant by the throat with terrifying force, and crushed his head in a gruesome display before the stunned audience. The horrifying act left the entire arena speechless. No one had imagined a prince would execute his own retainer in public. Whispers spread that Valentin had lost his sanity, and the suspicion was not unfounded. Ever since encountering Shariat, his demeanor had drastically changed. Panic erupted in the stands as people began scrambling to escape. The prince appeared utterly deranged and close to total collapse. Officials recognized the urgency, yet understood subduing him would not be simple. At that critical moment, Davy stepped forward. He hurried to Benedict's side and assured him the fight was finished, and he had performed admirably. Benedict mentioned that he had successfully formed a mana barrier. Davy smiled with pride, knowing such a defensive spell was advanced and capable of shielding its caster. Although Davy had placed a hidden safeguard, he acknowledged that Benedict's own progress was the true reason he survived. 14-year-old, it was remarkable, and despite youthful flaws, his potential was undeniable. Davy had expected tears or complaints, yet Benedict bore the pain with surprising resolve. Even so, Davy insisted he had done enough and needed immediate rest. Medical staff then carried Benedict away on a stretcher. Meanwhile, chaos continued elsewhere in the arena as Valentin rampaged uncontrollably, a crisis Davy realized he must personally address. Several mages attempted to restrain the frenzied prince. Even coordinated spells failed to suppress him. His body and aura appeared distorted, as though altered by some corruption. Worse still, his strength had surged beyond what the mages could manage. They focused on evacuating civilians, while the barrier still held. However, at that instant, Davy entered the battlefield, catching the already strained mages off guard. He warned him urgently not to approach, claiming Valentin was far too dangerous. Winley, watching from above, felt her heart tighten at the sight of Davy below, especially since she had not even seen him descend into the arena. Despite the warnings, Davy intended to resolve the turmoil himself. He sensed that Valentin was afflicted by some foreign influence, and muttered that whatever possessed him had taken full control. He began calculating how best to neutralize the threat. Valentin's fury intensified the moment he spotted Davy. As he lunged toward him, the mages attempted once more to intercept. Their efforts were futile against his rampaging strength. Valentin broke through with a clear path toward Davy. Suddenly, Winley leapt into the arena, driven by fear for her brother. Davy was genuinely startled by her sudden arrival. This unexpected move had not been part of his calculations. He had hoped to keep her uninvolved, yet she was not alone in intervening. Lena arrived immediately afterward and shoved Davy aside to face the threat. Her appearance caught Davy completely off guard. Moments earlier, she had been nowhere in sight, as though she materialized from thin air. Her stance made it clear she intended to defeat Valentin decisively. Valentin at this stage was driven purely by instinct without rational thought. Lena, however, acted with deliberate precision. She unleashed a powerful technique known as the Great Mountain Divider. Strike connected and hurled Valencian across the arena. Witnessing her skill firsthand left Davy genuinely impressed. Believing her attack sufficient, Alina assumed the crisis was over. To her surprise, Valencian rose again. Though her blow had been formidable, it failed to incapacitate him completely. Worse still, his gaze grew even more savage and unhinged. Before he could retaliate, Alina launched another assault without hesitation, striking from multiple angles in rapid succession. Determined to render him unable to fight any longer, she unleashed relentless strikes with both her sword and bare hands. Exploiting the fact that the foe stubbornly endured each blow, Alina poured every ounce of strength into the confrontation without restraint. Watching her battle with such fierce intensity, many in the audience were left utterly stunned. At last, Alina believed she had prevailed. Valencian lay motionless as though unconscious. She immediately commanded the guards to seize him for his crimes. Winley tugged at Davy, urging him to step back and allow Alina to resolve them. Meanwhile, Davy silently admired the princess's vigor, realizing she surpassed the vast majority of swordsmen he had encountered. However, Alina noticed something no one else did, and suddenly identified Valencian as a vampire. Davy was momentarily confused by her claim. Alina advanced toward the restrained enemy. Even bound in chains, Valencian retained the ability to move. In a twisted act, he began injuring himself. From a distance, Davy observed carefully, fully aware of what was unfolding. Alina attempted to interrupt the ritual. She failed to reach him in time. As a result, Valencian unleashed a surging tide of blood, and those nearest were the first to collapse. Within the crimson haze, Davy rushed to shield his sister. Winley began to feel faint, but instead of panicking for herself, she worried about Davy. Trying to comfort her, he assured her that everything would be fine. He gently rose and asked her to close her eyes for a while, promising that, when she awoke, it would seem like nothing more than a nightmare. Once he placed her into a controlled sleep, Davy decided it was time to intervene. Otherwise, the necromantic mana saturating the air would spiral further out of control. He alone truly grasped the nature of the situation. He believed that when a person bonded deeply with their mana, it began developing its own temperament. In his case, he wielded 3 distinct forces, each with its own character. Necromantic mana was like a deranged mind, ruthless yet highly effective. Ordinary mana resembled its tsundere, difficult at first but cooperative once trust was earned. The most obstinate of all was holy power. That force was stubborn and sluggish, refusing to respond without cause. Thus, without significant upheaval, holy power rarely manifested. The chaos before him qualified as more than sufficient. In response, Davy received the Radiant Blessing, a 4th-tier holy spell. With Winley temporarily safe, he finally had the space to strategize. Deduced that Valencian had invoked Blood Tide, an ability that siphoned vitality from all nearby living beings. The unfortunate reality was that he lacked the strength to save everyone present. Though he was relieved Benedict had already departed. With fewer eyes upon him, he could act freely without concealing his true abilities. To his surprise, Alina remained conscious and even managed to stand. The warrior of her pride would never surrender so easily. Davy considered her resilience a troubling complication. He had assumed no one else could withstand the blood tide besides himself. Yet seeing Alina de Ferran upright reminded him why she had been chosen by the divine sword. However, he could not help noticing how striking she appeared even in exhaustion. He moved closer to her and placed his hands lightly on her shoulders. She reacted with a slight recoil. Davy asked gently whether she was hurt. Even amid danger, Alina kept him at a cautious distance. The abomination still roamed free, and Davy wished only to assist. Sensing her reluctance, he advised her to withdraw if she had strength remaining. Instead, she seized his arm firmly and demanded to know why he showed no signs of weakness. Davy realized he was cornered by her suspicion. He had expected doubt eventually, but not such direct questioning, so he feigned ignorance, claiming he had no idea why the mist left him unaffected. Alina's skeptical gaze revealed she was unconvinced, though Davy privately felt she owed him gratitude for her survival. Nevertheless, she asserted command, ordering him to flee the arena while she handled the threat. She insisted the crisis exceeded anything he could manage, reminding him that fortune from a prior duel would not save him now. Clearly, she still regarded him as an ordinary and helpless prince. Armed with knowledge from ancient texts, she recognized blood demons as true vampires, warned him that luck was meaningless against such creatures, for anyone unable to sense or wield mana would be slaughtered instantly. Davy replied that the enemy would never permit an easy escape. Alina declared she would create an opening for him regardless. Davy observed her unwavering confidence, yet she appeared more emotionally charged than during their earlier clash. Almost as though confronting a personal nemesis, memories surfaced revealing a fragment of her childhood. As a young girl, she once wandered the palace at night searching for her mother, only to discover her mother draining blood from another person. Even at that tender age, Alina understood the horror was a vampire. The image had haunted her ever since. Facing Valentin now, she resolved that every remaining vampire must be destroyed. So long as she breathed, that mission would guide her. Just as she prepared to strike, Davy tugged her hair lightly to stop her advance. He apologized, but firmly asked her not to meddle in his affairs. Though puzzled by her obsession, Davy cast aside his disguise and readied himself for battle. Contrary to her assumptions, he possessed extensive knowledge about vampires. His training had covered their nature in depth and perhaps surpassed her understanding. Moreover, he had confronted several before, gaining considerable experience. Engaging another vampire felt almost routine to him. While evading attacks, he muttered that the creature seemed even duller than during their previous encounter. Yet he was not content merely to dodge. His intention was to strike decisively and end the threat. He delivered a powerful blow aimed straight at the foe's heart. It was a manifestation of celestial demonic technique, specifically the art known as demonic blood explosion. Impact not only struck true, but blasted the enemy across the arena. Alina watched in astonishment as the supposedly weak prince displayed overwhelming might. After witnessing that strike, she questioned what kind of power it was. Seeing Davy unleash such force made her doubt whether any ordinary human could achieve it. To that point, she had assumed Davy was nothing more than a regular man who couldn't even perceive mana. Yet she had personally witnessed him shatter a statue while striking down a vampire. It was a feat that even seasoned knights or skilled mages would struggle with, and she herself couldn't accomplish it even wielding her blade. That left her questioning whether Davy was truly just a prince who had only recently awakened from a coma. The young man reached out his hand toward Alina, but she instinctively flinched away in fright. Despite her reaction, he kept his hand extended. She assumed the prince was offering assistance to help her stand. Believing he meant well, Alina chose to accept the gesture. However, just as her fingers were about to meet his, Davy calmly asked if he could borrow her sword. Only then did she realize he hadn't been acting gallantly at all, and she flushed at her own misunderstanding. She explained that her blade had shattered during her first clash with Valentin. Davy clarified that he wasn't talking about that weapon. He meant the sword she carried hanging from her necklace. He mentioned he would require something exceptionally durable to confront their foe. Davy began persuading the divine sword to grant him its strength. He was aware that Surtur, the heavenly smith, had devoted his entire existence to forging innumerable arms, including the legendary blade that once saved the world. In Surtur's grasp, even shattered steel was reborn as priceless relics, and his reputation echoed throughout the continent. Most notably, 12 infamous swords of his creation were dispersed across the realm and revered as treasures of nations. Among those masterpieces, however, one stood above the rest as his cherished creation, Caldera's, the White Guardian. Though counted among the 12, this particular sword carried unmatched significance. Caldera's surpassed the others because it had been forged for Surtur's friend, Herse the Sword God, who infused the weapon with his own life essence. As a result, the blade possessed a will of its own and could choose its actions, a fact that intrigued many who learned of it. Still, the protagonist understood its true character, since he had personally encountered Herse. Familiar with Herse's temperament, he knew the sword would not submit easily. Instantly, Caldera's demanded to know who he thought he was to seize it so boldly. Davy noted the reaction was exactly what he expected, and seeing the sword in its miniature state, he mockingly asked if all it could do was shriek like a lunatic. He remarked that cooperation would make things far smoother for both of them. That instant, the princess approached him, requesting the return of her blade. Davy warned that if Caldera's continued to refuse him, Alina would be the one to suffer. He was also impressed that even without the sword's aid, the princess remained steady within the thick fog, recognizing her remarkable resilience. Even so, he concluded the opponent was far beyond Alina's ability, and believed she needed to acknowledge her limits before acting recklessly. Despite everything, the blade stubbornly declined to assist, even with its guardian weakened. Davy realized persuasion alone would not suffice. Without hesitation, he forcibly drew upon the sword's authority. The weapon responded by revealing its authentic form. Observing its true appearance, Davy commented that Caldera's truly matched the tales told about it. The sword, in turn, questioned how he had managed such a feat. Davy replied that it simply needed to lend him its might for the battle and entrust the rest to him. He then synchronized his abilities with the divine blade and moved into action, calling bolts of lightning down from the heavens. Afterwards, he taunted his foe, asking how long he intended to remain concealed. Spotting a distortion ahead, he declared it was time for the villain to step forward. When only a tiny bat flew toward him, he scoffed, saying he had anticipated more from a vampire. He had expected something befitting a supposedly superior race. The bat abruptly morphed into a female vampire. Davy addressed her as Miss Maid, revealing he already knew she served the queen. Vampire admitted she had assumed someone was aiding the prince after her subordinates fell, only to realize he had acted alone. With heavy sarcasm, Davy praised himself and invited her to descend, claiming he was tired of craning his neck to look upward. He further teased that lingering too high might expose more than she intended. Shirley, in her vampiric state, grew visibly enraged by his taunts. This reaction was precisely what Davy had aimed for. Without delay, he launched forward with the divine blade. She warned that any large-scale destruction would absolve the Queen of blame and could shatter ties with the Vault's kingdom, potentially igniting war. Davy sensed that revealing her true form meant she was certain of her victory. Nonetheless, he declared her intentions would fail. His confident demeanor only deepened her fury. Finally, she chose to strike back. She unleashed her vampiric sorcery. Dark magic corroded everything in its path as it spread outward. Davy evaded the assault and casually told her to calm down, though his remark only inflamed her more. In response, she hurled a barrage of sharp spikes at him. He sprang from the pillar beneath him. Even there, the spikes chased him, narrowly missing their mark. While descending, he twisted through the air to avoid as many projectiles as he could. Eventually, he touched down on the ground. Like an experienced duelist, he parried the incoming strikes with precise swings. Vampire conceded he had surpassed her expectations, but insisted that no matter his strength, he remained human. Davy retorted that she shouldn't despise humans so deeply, considering she herself served one. Tolerance snapped after enduring his relentless provocations. Davy remarked that such irritability was typical of vampire lords, creatures both immensely powerful and endlessly aggravating, born strong and destined to rule once awakened. If not for their natural adversary, the great elf, they would be nearly invincible. Memory surfaced of the sword god admitting he used to taunt vampires before striking, unsettling them to gain the upper hand. He had explained that their immense pride made higher-ranked vampires especially vulnerable to wounded egos. Returning to the present, Davy pondered the Farron Empire's devotion to Horace and wondered how they would react if they discovered his true character. Then refocused on the battle at hand. After slipping past several attacks, he retaliated with a decisive slash. Yet the vampire conjured a barrier to block it. It was no ordinary shield, but one formed from blood itself. Calderas observed that she was likely a countess, not the highest rank yet a pureblood capable of rivaling a lord. Davy declared he had no choice but to defeat her now, while Calderas questioned whether he truly possessed that ability. He answered confidently and challenged the sword, asking if it felt fear. Before any reply came, another attack struck. Shirley remarked that those who feign composure in such moments always share the same fate. She added that even the strong girl entrusted with the divine sword had ultimately collapsed. Furthermore, she intended to subdue the prince and leave him barely recognizable, so she could present his body as proof. She lunged at Davy once more. He had no intention of making her task simple. Rather than waiting passively for the blow, he charged straight toward her. Watching this, she sneered that his action was pure recklessness. He attempted another strike. Davy slipped past it and maneuvered behind her. He mocked her ignorance, especially regarding the true essence of swordplay. He reflected that swordsmanship was far more than mindlessly swinging a blade again and again. Drawing upon his accumulated mastery, he unleashed Caldera's technique against her. The attack drove her into despair, as she realized escape was impossible. It struck her cleanly, sending her crashing down like a falling star. When the dust settled, the landscape had been so drastically altered that even Davy was stunned by the aftermath. Calderas began to speak about something connected to his history. Davy cut him off before he could continue. He remarked that since millennia had passed since Calderas was forged, he had no interest in hearing the entire tale. What he truly desired was to finish the battle rather than waste time in conversation. He reasoned that even if he claimed to be the first owner's disciple, the sword likely would not accept it. Calderas sensed the vampire attempting to escape, but Davy advised that pursuing her now would be unwise. The blade commented that even it found the overwhelming stench of blood revolting. Thankfully, the mist would cease expanding since its origin had been destroyed in the blast. Even so, bloodstones still lingered nearby, and Davy knew those touched by the crimson tide either perished or became corrupted. If the tainted were not dealt with swiftly, they would spread the corruption further, and although the fog was trapped within the arena for now, failure to contain it could lead to chaos beyond. Calderas observed that Davy had been fortunate to avoid such a corrosive force, and admitted that despite his youth, his skill was undeniable. Davy agreed to some extent, and added that awakening the blade aura would take time, as his power had not been cultivated in the usual manner. When wisdom and refined technique merge with solid ability, That is when one ascends to mastery. Davy fit that description, and Calderas began to sense a fragment of his vast and immeasurable strength. Moreover, the sword detected both shadow mana and holy energy within him, something it had never encountered before. Davy casually stated that he had a habit of overturning conventions, though Calderas bluntly called him insane for achieving such balance. Davy explained that this outcome was the product of centuries of meticulous study, yet he had no desire to elaborate further, as pressing matters still awaited him. Recognizing he could not manage everything alone, he permitted Calderas to assist. He reflected that self-sacrifice was not in his nature, but if it meant reclaiming his lost strength, it might be worthwhile. Though unconventional for him, he was willing to attempt it for the potential gains. He then offered a prayer to the goddess Freyja, pleading on behalf of those harmed by the bloody tie. He further requested her intervention, admitting he lacked the power to resolve it by himself. Hearing this, Calderas questioned whether that was truly how one should petition a goddess. Sword also noticed that Davy seemed unfamiliar with such rituals. Influenced by Daphne's sanctity, Davy understood that divine power stemmed not from blind devotion, but from comprehension of faith itself. It was less about earning a god's affection and more about capturing divine curiosity. So since lives were at stake, he sought only Freyja's consent to act through the sword. Calderas scoffed, declaring no god would heed such an irreverent plea. Davy retorted that the sword clearly misunderstood the nature of deities. He insisted divine favor was not reserved for the self-proclaimed faithful, but for those whose actions piqued celestial interest. As Calderas had mentioned, the drained life force could not simply be restored, so the crystal needed to be filled with an even greater energy. It meant the highest form of sacred magic, attainable only through divine blessing, and once wielded by Saint Daphne, the greatest practitioner in history. He even remarked that gods tended to favor the mad, especially individuals who defied all norms. In the next instant, holy power descended from the sky. It enveloped both Davy and Calderas. Sword was stunned, recognizing it as ninth rank power and fearing it might be obliterated, accusing Davy of reckless intent. In truth, Davy was safeguarding it, as he could not bear such force himself and used the blade as a vessel instead. That strength stored, he aimed to purify the inner arena. The radiance was so immense that even distant observers saw a blazing light brighter than the sun. Ethereal wings unfolded around Davy's form. His injuries vanished in an instant. The dark crystal shattered, and the malevolent presence dissipated. Davy joked that the impact had felt like being crushed by a carriage. He teased Calderas, noting it had survived the ordeal, though he suspected the sword was thoroughly drained. Despite trying to stay upright, he felt a searing pain along his back and his strength faded. He collapsed onto the ground. Before his fading vision, something materialized. He perceived his attributes as though displayed in a system interface and noticed certain changes, including an unusual title labeling him as insane. He wondered if Freyja had exaggerated with such a nickname. From above, the figure he believed to be Freyja merely smiled softly, clearly intrigued by him. Later, recalling the events, he questioned when he had last slept so deeply, as for half a year he had rested only with anxiety. His slumber seemed to have cleared his thoughts somewhat. Upon awakening, he saw Winley, who explained he was resting in the Phillies' duchy and asked about his condition. Sitting up, he inquired how long he had been unconscious. She told him 2 days had passed and admitted she had feared he might never awaken. Davy realized her concern was genuine, and given his past collapses, her fear was understandable. Winley then mentioned she had experienced a peculiar dream in which she wandered through red mist while her brother rescued her. Doubting its reality, she asked him what truly transpired that day. He also revealed that during her examination of him, she discovered something unusual. A mark upon his back identified as a stigma. It stretched roughly 3 handspans, far too prominent to ignore. Startled, he connected it to the earlier pain and realized Freyja must have branded him, questioning whether such a large mark was necessary. Winley explained a priest had first noticed it, and news of it had spread throughout the duchy, causing unrest. He was found, the mist had vanished, and sacred energy had gathered densely around him. He reflected that a stigma signified divine favor, and felt relieved that only this detail had become known. Winley, however, still sought clarity about his ordeal. Unsure whether revealing the truth would complicate matters, he hesitated, knowing it could hinder his path. Ultimately, he concealed the truth, claiming he had fainted and remembered nothing, and though skeptical, Winley accepted it and asked if he felt pain. After considering it, he realized he felt stronger than ever. Besides channeling 9th rank sacred magic through the sword, he had enhanced his own holy power. The improvement was remarkable, as his mana reserves had expanded greatly. All 3 of his energies had grown, enabling him to manifest an aura blade befitting a master. Sacred magic had progressed the most, yet the stigma seemed to elevate his other abilities as well. though he regretted that growth always came through extreme trials. Winley recounted the turmoil during his sleep, especially Amy's panic upon learning what happened. He added that Princess Alina had visited, intending to bring him to her kingdom for superior treatment. Davy expressed gratitude for her care and urged her to rest, promising to do likewise. Before departing, Winley assured him that Benitez had left safely once the tournament was cancelled. Despite the chaos, she wished for his swift recovery. Once alone, Davy reopened the status window linked to his stigma. It resembled a game interface, and though he did not fully grasp its origin, he suspected Freya was responsible, whether due to his prayer or the use of divine magic, deciding it was unimportant for now. Suddenly, a voice addressed him, suggesting he could pretend to conceal it with a barrier. Yet it remarked that he was already accustomed to glimpsing others' statuses. Startled, Davy demanded to know who was speaking. He warned that deceiving his senses so boldly would not go unpunished, and vowed to uncover the culprit. Soon after, the owner of the voice manifested and instructed him to look downward. The entity confessed embarrassment that her seal had been broken, but if it was divine will, she would not resist. A memory surfaced of discovering the sword god's artistic talent and wondering whose portrait Horace had been painting. Observing the horns and crimson eyes in the image, he deduced it depicted a powerful demon. The intricate details suggested Horace had known this demon intimately to capture her so precisely. Horace described her as surpassingly beautiful, unmatched even by the maidens of paradise. Her name was Purcell, though now only her father's memories remained. When he was mortal, he had adopted her and taught her the sword. Tragically, fate forced him to defeat and seal his own daughter to end a devastating war. Thus, Purcell von Farron came to be feared as the demon queen of the abyss. Returning to the present, he beheld the abyssal demon queen, recognized her instantly. Catching his reaction, Purcell remarked that his sharp gaze had never failed to impress her. Observing his stunned expression, she questioned what was on his mind, and Davy bluntly admitted she was far smaller than he had pictured. Not long after, Davy bound Purcell, prompting her to complain that such treatment was terribly impolite, and that, unlike humans, she found no amusement in it. Davy, however, insisted that this situation was far from playful. Purcell responded that since this was their first encounter, she saw no justification for such hostility. He added that she was puzzled about how she could possibly form a symbiotic bond with someone so discourteous. Confused, Davy asked what she meant, and Purcell clarified she referred to the mark on his back, intended as a vessel to house her soul. At that moment, Davy finally grasped why the stigma had been drawn so large. Truth became clear, as the mark was in fact a sealing array meant to confine a demon king. After her explanation, Purcell requested to be untied once more, emphasizing her dislike for such predicaments. She confessed that being restrained like that felt both humiliating and uncomfortable. Davy eventually removed her bindings and demanded to know what a demon queen sealed within a sword wanted from him, warning her that her reply must be direct and persuasive. To begin with, she introduced herself with composure as Purcell von Farron, sovereign of the abyss who observes everything from the endless void. She further explained that the phrase, "when you gaze into the void, it gazes back," was born because of her existence. Beyond that, she revealed she had been the main instigator behind the massive war that erupted between humanity and demonkind. Until then, all Davy knew of Caldera's was that Harris had wielded it to strike down the Demon King and conclude the war, but he had now learned the blade also contained Purcell's soul, imprisoned there by her own father. Moreover, Purcell appeared nothing like the Demon Kings he had imagined, as Davy once believed his strength came from the goddess Freya rather than from a demon. Purcell clarified that Caldera's was simply a kind spirit residing in the sword with her, and she admitted that had she known events would unfold this way, she would have offered a proper farewell. Still, she understood that Caldera's had never been one to dwell on emotions. Wasting no time, Purcell stated that by divine will she had been moved from the sword into Davy himself. Davy said he couldn't grasp why this had happened, yet Purcell confessed she was equally clueless, which clearly irritated her. In any case, since Davy had activated sacred magic through the blade, she insisted that he was accountable for the outcome. She also admitted a personal curiosity about him, considering Davy was only the second individual to fully awaken the divine sword's true power, and she asked whether he had ever encountered Hares. He answered that he had, remembering how Hares used to say that Purcell might someday return. Demon Queen seemed satisfied knowing her father mentioned her openly, rather than hiding her existence. Davy commented that sometimes people should keep certain truths concealed, questioning why anyone would bother deceiving a demon king. In response, Purcell felt compelled to clarify a misunderstanding about herself. She stated that she wasn't truly the one watching from the void, but had merely borrowed the authority of a far greater entity. It meant the status window, which she believed humans referred to as the great divinity. Listening to her, Davy found it hard to accept that someone as formidable as Perselk spoke in such a childish manner. He also questioned what a divine being radiating sacred energy could possibly want from someone like him. Perselk suggested they stroll together, saying he could show her how fascinating the outside world truly was. Davy asked what benefit he would receive, and she replied he had already gained plenty by inheriting her abilities, adding that with the system window, he now had the potential to accumulate even greater powers. Davy became aware that Perselk understood far more about him than he expected, and that realization unsettled him. Even so, Perselk claimed the exchange had favored him greatly, and she looked forward to seeing how he would repay her. Davy found her abilities undeniably alluring, and had no intention of surrendering them. In the end, he chose to comply with her request. On top of that, he had unintentionally gained a companion capable of hearing his innermost thoughts without suffering any repercussions. Sometime afterward, the grand festival in the Duchy of Felice, once planned as a fencing competition, transformed into a celebratory gathering after an unexpected assault. During the chaos, rumors surrounding Davy's stigma thrust him into the spotlight. As a result, leaving his chambers became nearly impossible for him. Perselk observed that since he had saved everyone, perhaps revealing the truth would be wiser than concealing it. After all, anyone who saw the stigma would recognize it as a physical sign of divine favor. Davy understood that only 3 saints had appeared in 4 centuries, and that a stigma was even rarer, making a public reveal unthinkable. With that in mind, he went to the twins and told them to prepare their belongings at once. Rather than stand around offering explanations, he preferred to depart immediately and return home. Winley agreed, reasoning they had committed no wrongdoing and owed no clarifications, especially since they weren't even on holy ground. Inwardly, Davy reflected that for a brief time this place, along with half the city, might truly have been sacred land. Even so, retreating when matters grew troublesome seemed the wisest course. While fleeing, Perselk wondered if leaving so abruptly was wise, noting that some might chase him all the way to his homeland seeking answers. Davy responded that everything would be fine so long as a greater spectacle diverted public attention. Not long after, news of Davy's sudden departure reached Elena. She was enraged, arguing that he had abandoned both a massive problem and a web of misunderstandings before escaping with his siblings. He had claimed he defeated the enemy upon awakening the sacred sword, and that the stigma resulted from the blade's concealed power. Lena, however, declared that the entire story was fabricated. Watching the princess seethe, her maid reflected on the 10 years she had served her. She wondered what chaos would follow if the public ever saw that beneath the icy and commanding exterior lay a fierce and impulsive young woman. Elena then ordered her maid to have the knights ready themselves without delay. During the journey home, Davy noticed his siblings asleep side by side. He thought they actually appeared harmonious like this, and it was comforting to see them at peace, even if only in slumber. Amid the quiet, Perselk asked whether he regretted what had happened to Calderas. She pointed out that aside from its present wielder, Davy alone understood the sword's true essence and perhaps should have been acknowledged as its rightful master. Davy admitted he wished that were possible, yet until he regained his former strength, he couldn't wield such holy power. Tempting though it was, he refused to steal, meaning he would not attempt to take the sword from its current owner. Besides, he remarked that the weapon didn't match his style, and he wasn't fond of oversized, heavy blades. Furthermore, there was another sword he secretly desired instead. From his look alone, Perselk sensed he already had a scheme in mind. She confessed that even with her insight, parts of Davy remained hidden beyond her reach. Setting that aside, she asked what he intended to do once they arrived home. The stigma restraining his foes, she suggested it would be ideal to eliminate them immediately. Davy replied he would never act without preparation, noting that the noble faction led by Duke Barrietta wielded far greater influence than Queen Linus. For that reason, the crown couldn't discipline the nobles recklessly, and removing them individually would be slow, a reality that had only inflated the queen's pride. Nevertheless, Davy already had a countermeasure in mind. Upon returning, they were all summoned for an audience with the king. Benedus offered an apology for the incident, but the king assured him he bore no blame. Instead, the king faulted the Vault's kingdom for opposing the union of nations, and felt relieved Benedict had come back unharmed, having also learned about the stigma. Davy explained that despite his unworthiness, he had somehow drawn divine interest and received the mark, unlike the king. Queen clearly disliked hearing that. Even so, she forced herself to remain composed and outwardly congratulated the prince on his accomplishment. King declared the matter serious and commanded that another letter be sent to the Voltes' kingdom to reaffirm their proposal of alliance. He instructed the twins to rest after their exhausting trip. However, he requested Davy remain behind for a private discussion. Davy noted it had been nearly 6 months since the king last summoned him. In fact, it was their first proper meeting since he awoke from his coma. king asked if resentment lingered, and though Davy felt no need to lie, he chose not to reveal everything, acknowledging that his father had watched over him through the chief chamberlain. The king remarked that no parent could miss such a drastic transformation in their child, and though he didn't see himself as a good father, he had recognized the change in Davy. That realization was why he had finally agreed to speak with him after so long. Their previous encounter had been when young Davy pleaded for his mother's life, asking whether his father had been informed of her condition. Davy had argued she wasn't ill, but had been poisoned. Yet his father ignored the claim entirely and ordered the guards to remove the boy from the chamber. Even then, Davy refused to withdraw without answers, though he lacked the power to resist. 4 years later, he uncovered the truth about the poisoning, but the king never addressed it, and now Davy demanded to know if his father felt satisfied abandoning his mother to wed an enemy for political gain. The king admitted the blame lay not with his present queen, but with himself. However, Davy had no desire to listen further. He simply wanted to know if there was any regret, since his mother had called for him until her final breath, and no matter how hard he tried, that wound refused to fade. He could still picture her dying with tears streaming down her face. The king conceded he hadn't been an ideal father, explaining that a monarch's role rarely allowed personal choice and often required decisions shrouded in uncertainty. Therefore, he urged Davy to remain quiet and strengthen himself daily, so that no one could obstruct his path or future sovereignty. His wish was to eventually hand the throne to his son. Yet Davy realized his father seemed to have entirely cast aside memories of his mother. He replied that while sons are expected to walk in their father's footsteps, he refused, declaring that if ruling meant sacrificing family for the realm, he would reject such a destiny. Though many coveted the crown, Davy insisted he did not, stating the king should grant it to someone else. He made it clear he would not accept that position, even under coercion. After departing the hall, Purcell commented on his bluntness, and he answered it was necessary, adding that regardless of how deeply she perceived him, some principles would never change. He added that through everything, he had come to understand his true desire. Back in his chambers, he instructed Amy to ensure no one disturbed him for the remainder of the day. Standing by the window, Davy prepared to embark on a mission, announcing it was time to descend into the rabbit hole. Later in the kingdom of Ron, controlled by the Black Moon Guild, reports surfaced that Shirley had vanished. Additionally, the guild leader revealed that several operatives had disappeared days earlier. Reports stated they had failed in their mission to assassinate the princes of Rome. A guild member scoffed that being labeled a Class A intelligence unit sent from headquarters evidently meant little. The guildmaster cautioned him to mind his tongue if he valued his life. Yet the man argued that the missing woman's identity remained unclear and doubted that mere youths could cause such turmoil. Declaring his loyalty to the guild, he vowed to pursue both the boys and Shirley personally. After all, only a true professional killer could carry out something of that. The leader's attendant questioned whether they should intervene, but the leader replied that the man's pride would ultimately destroy him and allowed him to proceed. He also revealed that despite her Class A title, Shirley's real abilities surpassed that rank, though most within the guild were unaware. In truth, Shirley was far more lethal than her appearance suggested. Still, he couldn't comprehend how someone so formidable could fail to assassinate defenseless children and then vanish without a trace. He decided it was time to withdraw, yet he found it strange that none of his calls were being answered. At that moment, the guildmaster sensed danger and attempted to react, but instantly, a blade pressed against his throat, and a calm voice warned him not to make any rash movements. He then realized his servant had already been taken down without him noticing. Soon after, he was shoved harshly against his own desk. The attacker observed that the guild leader was merely human, not a vampire as expected. Frustrated, the leader wondered why none of his subordinates had rushed in to stop the intruder. What he didn't know was that the assailant had already dealt with everyone else before stepping inside. The intruder added that screaming would be useless, since no one remained to rescue him. The leader understood that if the situation continued, he would soon be dead. Desperate, he tried negotiating and asked whether the Ruxo or Karsha Guild had sent the assassin. Ignoring the question, the intruder stated that survival depended on handing over the requested information. Terrified, the leader agreed to provide whatever was asked in exchange for his life. The attacker then loosened his grip and let him move. He explained his demands were simple. He required a roster of nobles acting as agents for the Barrietta family and a full record of crimes committed by the influential Duke. He already knew the Duke kept detailed files on those under his control and that the evidence was stored here, prompting the leader to attempt escape. With a single raised finger, the intruder stopped him, warning he would not repeat himself. At that point, the leader realized he faced a top-tier assassin. The intruder claimed he could detect falsehoods easily, advising against any attempt at deception. He then calmly asked what choice the guild leader intended to make. After some time, the masked figure emerged carrying the desired documents. It was Davy in disguise, and upon reviewing the papers, he noted the abundance of data, though some might be fabricated. Nevertheless, he intended to raid other guilds as well, believing that compiling every report would allow him to corner the nobles. Urselk remarked that such actions might soon lead to a massacre. Davy didn't entirely oppose the idea, yet he understood the importance of careful planning. After all, even the most powerful noble inevitably has rivals in politics. Just like Marquis Patris, his late mother's knight, and one of the Round Kingdom's 3 swordmasters. Upon reading a letter, the Marquis was shaken and urgently summoned his butler after uncovering a dreadful truth. If matters unfolded as expected, Duke Barrietta would effectively sever his own limbs through his schemes. Davy described the evening's theme as a discreet visit under the cover of night. Urselk asked him what his true aim was. He replied that she already knew, as he simply wished to safeguard his family, secure food and shelter, avoid turmoil, and live peacefully for many years. Urselk found it odd for a prince to speak so modestly, since that was essentially how he lived already. He explained he would soon depart to oversee a small territory granted to him, where he planned to shape his own future in one of the continent's most developed cities. Revenge would be pursued if the opportunity arose, but it was not his primary focus, and he refused to let it consume his life. Urselk argued that becoming king would accelerate his ambitions, noting that ruling a nation wasn't so different from managing land. Davy countered that administering a modest territory was far less complex than governing an entire kingdom. Besides, he longed for a quieter existence. What he truly desired was a place he could genuinely call home. Back in court, the queen proclaimed that Prince Davy was the pride of the realm due to his stigma. She questioned why the king had not rewarded such an accomplishment. Since he had recovered and been granted land, she suggested sending him to govern it would be appropriate. Many were puzzled by the queen's sudden admiration for the prince. Privately, she admitted she would never have praised him under normal circumstances, but the failed assassination attempt and Shirley's disappearance had complicated matters considerably. Furthermore, the intelligence guild housing the Duke's secrets had been assaulted at 7 sites in one night, alarming her deeply. The guildmaster reported that an unstoppable and untraceable monster had carried out the attacks. This revelation heightened her anxiety, knowing the consequences if her hidden dealings were exposed. The evidence could brand her as a traitor plotting against the crown. She also began doubting Marquis Patris's loyalty. She suspected he might side with Prince Davy over her. If so, eliminating the Marquis would be the obvious solution. However, without Shirley's assistance, her only viable move was to push the prince out of the palace. She proposed distancing him. She hadn't anticipated the king's swift agreement. To her surprise, he accepted immediately. The king reasoned that an adult prince without a crown should not linger in the palace and ordered preparations for Davy's departure. Queen was taken aback and questioned the king's intentions. Soon after, the protagonist was called to meet the king, a development he had already expected. He knew it was only a matter of time before the kingdom viewed him as a potential threat and sought to remove him. King instructed Davy to cultivate his territory and demonstrate his capability. Urselk speculated that the king feared rebellion, which explained the decision to send him away. Ironically, Davy had planned to leave of his own accord even before this decree. He assumed the king and queen had their own agendas and felt it was no longer his place to remain, especially with other matters awaiting him. Amid these events, Urselk noted that his recent actions had made the situation precarious and endangered many. Yet Davy remained calm, believing the kingdom required drastic reform before a new ruler could ascend. He refused to pass the current state to Varys, and considered it an added benefit if he could confront his foe along the way. As soon as he exited the audience chamber, the twins rushed to him anxiously, asking why he had to depart and whether they could assist. Davy reassured them that leaving was his own decision, and that with the stigma he was no longer defenseless. He asked them to place their trust in him. Winley urged him to seek their help anytime, promising full support even for trivial matters. Davy explained that while Hein's territory was far from ideal, it was home to many residents. He vowed to transform it into a livable place and invite them once it flourished. Afterwards, he instructed Amy to retrieve every document available about Hein's territory from the finance ministry and territorial administration. He added that officials would hardly refuse if Amy mentioned the request came from Prince Davy. Urselk observed that he carried himself as though nothing could threaten him. He found his confidence intriguing. She remarked that her mother had always been drawn to peculiar individuals. Moreover, despite his immense strength, Davy had not turned into an unbearable or arrogant man. He asked if she was beginning to sympathize with him. Urselk answered that compared to her mother, Davy was far gentler so perhaps genuine sympathy had developed. He even teased that he should feel honored since the Demon Queen had become his admirer. Davy replied that he would consider it a compliment. Shortly afterward, Amy returned carrying the limited records she could obtain. From the sparse information, Davy deduced that the territory was little more than an isolated rural village. In reflection, he thought that might grant him greater autonomy to shape it as he pleased. He felt excited to pioneer the land, and Purcell shared that enthusiasm. He was equally curious about the endeavor. However, upon reviewing the papers, she realized Hines' territory was considered cursed ground. That revelation didn't shock her, as she expected no gift to come without hidden drawbacks. Davy had to admit she was likely correct. Soon enough, every arrangement for their relocation had been finalized. Amy then confirmed whether all those accompanying Davy had assembled. He answered that his circle was small, as only a handful had pledged their loyalty to him. Shortly after, Marquis Patris formally presented himself before the prince. He advised Prince Davy that departing the palace was wise, noting that although he lacked a crown now, fate could still alter that. The Marquis added that Davy had matured greatly, and that his late mother would surely have taken pride in him. Davy objected, calling himself an unworthy son, however. The Marquis insisted that if that were true, he himself deserved punishment for failing in his duty to protect the prince. Davy had uncovered Patris's loyalty when he searched the Marquis's residence and found evidence collected about those responsible for his mother's death. Patris encouraged Davy to reach out whenever difficulties arose, promising support to the best of his ability. Davy warned that if word spread of the Marquis aiding him, turmoil would erupt throughout the palace. Patris responded that abandoning the prince would render his oath meaningless. Davy then declared he would make the small village his home, and trusted the Marquis to continue fulfilling his responsibilities within the palace. He appreciated having an ally inside the court, and hoped the Marquis would keep their enemies uneasy in his absence. Still, Davy intended to deliver the decisive strike personally when the time came. He reflected that traveling by monoportal would normally take a day, but since the territory lay near the capital, a carriage ride would suffice. During the journey, he glanced at Purcell. She resembled a fairy tale princess asleep, and he felt the time spent with her had passed quickly. He noticed how fond she was of sleeping, and wondered if her small form resulted from diminished magical strength. Meanwhile, she used his leg as a pillow. Davy gently draped a coat over her to keep her warm. A night outside announced they were nearing their destination. Soon, the territory came into view before Davy's eyes. Inns lay in the kingdom's eastern region, a barren stretch of sand where little thrived except roaming monsters. Its sole advantage was the main highway connecting to the capital, and if improved, it could become a crucial trade route. Yet it was infamous as a cursed wasteland where crops failed and people avoided settling. Once governed properly, 5 years earlier a relentless drought had ruined the land, and its origin remained a mystery. Considering this, Davy opened his status window to inspect the territory's data. He realized some of the listed details were incomplete. Purcell remarked that the root cause was a curse. She explained that such curses spread gradually like an addiction, beginning subtly before spiraling out of control. Davy hadn't expected traces of dark magic to persist. Apparently, a past resident had angered a powerful mage. He attempted to cleanse the land using purification magic. Purcell cautioned that lifting it would not be simple. A curse embedded for years would resist easy removal. Or still, it affected the entire territory. Life there had dwindled almost as much as knowledge of black magic, since cursed sorcerers had vanished long ago. Upon arrival, a group intercepted Davy's convoy. He demanded to know the identity of the newcomers. Surveying the settlement's defenses, Davy observed that they appeared alarmingly fragile. Questioned whether the presence of guards was even reassuring. Amid the tension, he stepped down from the carriage and declared they were all on the same side, urging calm. The guards quickly recognized the prince. They apologized at once for their rough greeting. Noticing their worn appearance, Davy felt troubled. He asked when they had been informed of his arrival. The guard answered that the message arrived 2 days earlier. Davy then inquired about recent monster raids. The guard's uneasy look provided the answer. Davy concluded that, before addressing the curse, the goblins must be handled first. The guard captain introduced himself as Moan Miter. He explained that with no lord present, he had overseen the territory's affairs. Now that the prince had arrived, leadership could officially pass to him. Davy praised their efforts and promoted them to formal guards. He informed Moan Miter that a lieutenant would train them properly and ordered him to organize the unit efficiently, adding that talent should never be wasted and promising a noble title if he improved. He still possessed the authority to grant such honors. Later, Davy evaluated the fortress and noted its defenses remained solid despite its age, wondering how goblins had breached it. Moan Miter admitted that constant fatigue among the guards had weakened their resistance. He revealed that many homes were torched and numerous townsfolk kidnapped. Additionally, supplies were insufficient for winter, and even farmers struggled to eat. Herself observed that wealth alone could not solve these issues, and that even repaired walls would last only a short time. Davy teased that if she kept criticizing, he would appoint her as his secretary. She declined, saying that role would cut into her sleeping hours. Regardless, Davy knew options were limited. He handed funds to the captain and ordered him to purchase as many supplies and materials as possible. Amy, who had traveled with him, asked how he still possessed such wealth. Davy offered a vague excuse, though in truth he had taken it from the intelligence guild. Herself scolded him lightly about theft, but he dismissed her and told her to rest. Bernal, who had resigned as palace butler to accompany him, volunteered to assist with procurement. A relative of Chamberlain Besfuse, he assured Davy he would secure everything needed. Davy urged them to proceed swiftly. He ordered only minimal guards remain, while the others regrouped with the knights. Outside, he constructed a platform to address the townspeople. He introduced himself formally as their new lord. He acknowledged the goblin kidnappings and noted that while some wanted revenge, others hid in fear. Even if not all were warriors, he insisted inaction was impossible, as the goblins would otherwise return. His aim was not mere defense, but complete eradication of the threat. Some villagers agreed, yet pointed out they were exhausted and barely able to stand as the final line of defense. Davy responded that one decisive victory would end the raids. He understood some viewed him as just another noble heir lacking ability, but he proclaimed himself not only a prince but their lord, declaring them his family and promising protection. He was not the sort to watch his family perish, knowing words alone might fail. He reminded them he bore a divine stigma that could attest to his resolve. If that was insufficient, he asked them to treat his declaration as an order. He vowed that no one would die without his consent. Later, Davy ventured into the demon forest with a contingent of men. Herself warned that leading exhausted and unprepared soldiers against goblins was reckless. Davy argued that their force of 150 should suffice. Herself cautioned against overconfidence, reminding him numbers could shift. Yet Davy insisted he had matters under control, earning her remark that his self-assurance was admirable. Guard captain then stated that beyond the mount, they would encounter the goblin stronghold. Upon reaching it, Davy saw it was an abandoned settlement and questioned how goblins and orcs could inhabit such a place. Moan Miter explained it had become a deserted village, now occupied by goblins. A young villager trembled with fury over a friend slain by goblins. Davy approached and told him he understood that pain. He urged them to channel that anger into courage, defeat the enemy, and honor the fallen through vengeance. Davy admired their loyalty to lost friends, even without blood ties. He concluded that this was indeed the right land for him. Without hesitation, he launched the first strike with an arrow. A goblin noticed too late as the projectile flew toward him and pierced him instantly. The arrow was also engulfed in blazing flames. The impact immediately ignited the surroundings, setting the area ablaze. Guards grew uneasy since they had planned a stealth strike, not an open confrontation. Davy reassured them calmly, promising that none of them would lose their lives under his command. He saw where the arrow struck. Davy smiled in satisfaction. It was forged by the frivolous god of archery, a deity who had perfected every Apollonian technique. How it fulfilled its role in battle, though it appeared disorderly. The skill was far from ordinary. It had originally been devised as a wartime trap, yet Davy chose to deploy it here. He was not someone who retreated over minor concerns. With that resolve, he initiated his first decisive move as Lord. He cast enhancement spells upon all his allies. Herself questioned the wisdom of enchanting these soldiers, but Davy replied that they were unaware of the magic anyway. All that mattered was that their spirits were lifted for combat. Once the blessings were complete, he remarked that few troops elsewhere enjoyed such advantages. Even Balshaz's holy paladins lacked this privilege, since only saints or popes could wield 7th-tier sacred spells. Davy urged them to release all the anger they had long harbored toward their foes. He felt as though he had always yearned for this moment. Then he commanded the charge, unaware of the guards' deep resentment. Their fervor showed they had been waiting for such an opportunity. The entire unit fought with overwhelming exhilaration. Meanwhile, the goblins who once terrorized humans now tasted that same dread themselves. They were swiftly overwhelmed and slain. The once hesitant guards discovered newfound confidence in their strength. Davy realized the clash had rapidly turned into a slaughter of goblins. He allowed them to vent their fury, while he provided support from behind. He quickly treated those who sustained injuries. He reminded them that he had not sanctioned any casualties, urging caution despite their advantage. Still, he assured them he would heal any wounds so they could fight boldly. Observing the imbalance, Davy almost felt sympathy for the outmatched goblins. Nevertheless, the guards soon eliminated every last one. They even expressed gratitude to their new lord afterward. Unaccustomed to such admiration, Davy felt slightly embarrassed. He reminded them celebrations were premature, since captives remained to be saved. As he walked, he reflected that his goal had simply been to erase their fear. Yet the outcome exceeded his expectations. Their admiration for him now bordered on excessive. By the following day, The guards appeared ready for a crusade, rather than a mere goblin hunt. However, Davy selected only 10 for the mission, leaving others disappointed. The captain mused that their 16-year-old lord was likely just thrilled by his first triumph. He assumed reality would soon temper the boys' enthusiasm. Not long after, that assumption was shattered. The lord returned unharmed with his small squad. The captain and others were stunned, realizing he had wiped out the remaining goblins swiftly with minimal forces. He sensed some might suspect sorcery or hypnosis behind the guard devotion. Yet his only concern was ensuring everyone's safe return. Urselk warned that such events could give rise to a cult-like following. Davy dismissed it, saying goblins still lingered and further expeditions were required. Some would accompany him, while others stayed to prepare for winter. He believed stability would return within days, and that the guards' fervor would subside. At least that was his expectation then. Instead, tales spread rapidly, and he was hailed as a saint among locals. Some guards even escorted him like disciples, following a holy leader. It was the first regret he felt since awakening from his coma. Still, earning genuine trust from the people mattered greatly to him. As Astrea, conqueror of the Palladian Empire and Davy's spear mentor, once said, ruling even a small land means guiding people, not hurting livestock. Therefore, loyalty must come from willing hearts. Though politics was not his strength, Davy agreed with that philosophy. While reviewing territorial records, Urselk appeared to ask about progress. Davy admitted parts were unclear, and Urselk estimated that even if the curse were lifted, 5 years would be needed for modest recovery and 2 decades for real prosperity. He then offered her frank assessment. Land lacked subterranean water sources, harvests were meager, and livestock had vanished, making meat scarce. Though his coins provided temporary relief, the broader financial deficit demanded resolution. Davy noted there was no industry to generate revenue, yet he believed alternative solutions existed. With many young adults present, he suggested organized monster hunting as a source of income. Another option involved cultivating a unique crop after restoring the soil. Barter remained possible, though it would mean exchanging valuables for necessities. Urselk countered that without partners or trade goods, such plans were impractical. Davy insisted on investigating personally, confident he would uncover an opportunity. He was prepared to utilize any resource available. As he searched, he remembered his dream of owning a grand estate. At present, he had little more than a pigsty, though the land had once been fertile. Former owners had abandoned it before a lord claimed it. Davy knew a mage's hidden base existed somewhere, and that mage had cast the curse, so he aimed to track them down. His divine energy had not fully recovered, making the task daunting without sufficient reserves. He briefly considered borrowing calderas again and persuading the princess with a fabricated excuse. Urselk advised strongly against such a reckless attempt. Davy concluded that only one path remained. He sensed a resource nearby waiting to be harnessed. He pressed his palms against the earth and initiated a curse restructuring spell. Urselk admitted she had never witnessed such magic, and Davy speculated its creator hailed from another continent. This art, called the magical programming language, was highly adaptable due to its complex mana patterns. It was why dark mages required artifacts or lengthy chants to replicate similar feats. Urselk realized it could trace the originator of the curse. Davy confirmed and began decoding the magical sequences. Urselk observed she had to deduce much herself, since Davy withheld certain knowledge. Soon she noticed an anomaly. Davy clarified that it was not truly a curse. Rather, it resembled a self-sustaining magical greenhouse, engineered by a mage. Proceeded toward the eastern border, intrigued by its sharply defined boundary. There he identified 7 likely sites tied to the mage, all aligned along the edges. Dome encompassed only Hein's territory, seemingly regulating its weather and terrain. Urselk deduced that the spell intentionally dried the land and suppressed rainfall. Davy agreed, noting he had located only one function so far and still questioned its motive, though it clearly aimed to render Heinz barren. He wondered what transformation would occur if the effect were reversed. With proper adjustments, he imagined even turning the desert into a thriving resort. Following the magical trail, he reached ancient ruins. Amid rugged stone, he found unexpected structures, likely post-dating the Great War, suggesting the curse had deliberate origins. Silence there felt unnervingly profound. Suddenly a golem emerged, prompting Urselk to admit she had spoken too soon. She observed it was no ordinary construct, but one powered by a magic core. Moreover, such golems could possess unique capabilities. Even so, the only thought running through the protagonist's mind was a single bold idea. Suddenly struck at, yet he twisted aside and avoided the blow. In the next instant, he had climbed onto the golem's massive body. Reaching for the embedded gem, he muttered that it practically reeked of profit. The moment he seized the jewel, he grinned triumphantly, declaring it his lucky day. Meanwhile, atop the city walls, several guards relaxed in the calm air while their lord ventured beyond. In truth, no one had anticipated Davy being so proactive. At present, not a single noble dared set foot in such a harsh and desolate land. Moreover, those who escaped to other cities were often met with disdain. Kingdom's only concession had been halting tax collection, since the people struggled just to survive. And amid this bleak reality, a young noble had been assigned there. Whispers claimed Davy had been exiled after losing influence, causing some to distrust his motives. Still, they had little choice, as he was the sole figure offering assistance. Before he arrived, the goblin assaults had reached unprecedented intensity, and without him, the settlement might have fallen. Previously, goblins had even breached the fortress and carried off townsfolk. The overwhelmed guards lacked the strength to reclaim those captives. In that turmoil, the prince appeared as their new lord, leaving many uncertain of his intentions. Some expected him to punish the captain for incompetence, but such action would have turned the people against him. Instead, he surprised everyone by managing the crisis with composure. He even engineered a chance to strike back at the goblins. Calling the villagers, his family sparked renewed hope that the abducted might return. Through deeds and speeches alike, Davy inspired the populace. Though he personally disliked the saintly title, he was elevated in their eyes almost to divine status. Them, witnessing tangible change, was easier to believe than praying to an unseen god. A young helper repairing walls remarked how fortunate they were that their lord had defeated the goblins. Yet he questioned whether the land had any real future. Long before goblins appeared, drought had already crippled the region. The relentless absence of rain ruined all attempts at cultivation. Clerics and mages had tried to reverse the damage, but none succeeded. Most concluded it was beyond human remedy, doubting even their blessed lord could restore the soil. As for Davy, he knew mana crystals formed from highly compressed pure magical energy. Compared to ordinary stones, they were worth and capable of far more. That was why he eagerly harvested those embedded in goblin skulls without hesitation. Though he claimed it required effort, Perselk found that hard to believe after watching him dispatch enemies so easily. Davy understood that such crystals were usually unearthed in ancient ruins, and only in tiny quantities. Their rarity only inflated their value further. Even so, he pondered how long their sale would sustain him, and Perselk warned that selling them openly would arouse suspicion. Continuing onward, he discovered a crystal far larger than the rest. He suspected it functioned as the curse's main power source. Realizing its worth, he understood wars had been fought over treasures of such magnitude. Overflowing with pure mana, it tempted him with visions of casting ninth circle spells freely. He examined its structure. He found the configuration excessive for merely causing drought. That suggested something concealed beneath the surface. Despite the complexity, he was determined to probe deeper. His analysis revealed hidden energy cores embedded within the magical code. Noticing the alteration in flow, Perselk asked what he had changed. He answered that he had introduced moisture into the system. However, with vast water already gathered in the clouds, it would soon descend all at once. A tremendous storm was imminent. Elsewhere, nobles convened in hushed debate. They discussed Marquis Patris and feared his independence might fracture their unity. Determined, they sought methods to prevent incriminating evidence from surfacing. It felt as though old sins were resurfacing, confronting them through unexpected adversaries. Meanwhile, the Queen had remained silent regarding both the turmoil and Davy's stigma. Some believed the mark was too unstable to pose a threat. Furthermore, the Sacred Kingdom's own circumstances prevented them from validating its authenticity. Others insisted that worrying over an average prince was a distraction from more pressing matters. At that point, Duke Barrietta redirected their attention. He asserted that noble solidarity would not collapse overnight. He argued that bold action was necessary, regardless of risk. Still, he prioritized retrieving the stolen confidential records. And if events spiraled, they must be prepared for open conflict. The servant pledged to arrange the required measures. The Duke ordered absolute secrecy until preparations were complete. Barrietta sensed others underestimated Prince Davy. His instincts warned him not to make that error. Since awakening from his coma, something about the boy had changed. With enough support, he might reveal formidable ambitions. Still, Barrietta believed Davy was powerless while confined to Hines. In his mind, nothing could be achieved in a barren wasteland. Yet reality proved otherwise. Davy summoned rainfall over Hines for the first time in years. Even so, he admitted the process demanded immense effort. Upon returning, he noted that planting could begin in a few days. The central crystal acted like a control console, allowing him to gauge conditions. Additionally, it linked to every other crystal in the area, functioning as a remote system. With this mechanism, Davy effectively governed the local climate, finding such convenience practical. The other crystals he stored carefully in enchanted bags. He resolved to wait until the soil revived before proceeding further. A week later, he strolled through the settlement. only to be met immediately by enthusiastic followers. He asked them why they trailed him so closely, and replied they wished to assist, since their lord labored tirelessly. Davy wondered whether they could endure the workload ahead. Nevertheless, he offered them a manageable task. The knights had prepared fields, and he requested volunteers to cultivate them. He gave them 4 days to plant, allowing withdrawal without penalty if they failed, promised fair wages according to effort, refusing to exploit unpaid labor. Captain argued that farming such vast land in 4 days was unrealistic despite the Davy disagreed, noting that the land had once been farmed and tools should remain available. While Manhwa worried about manpower, others speculated about spending their wages. The captain reminded them to appreciate their lord's generosity rather than exploit it. Davy, however, was no fool, it was not. He enhanced their strength with magic, granting workers vigor and determination. Manhwa watched in astonishment, yet he recognized its practical value. Davy remarked that swinging a pickaxe could open one's eyes to new possibilities. He added that with calderas, the empowerment would have been even greater. Manhwa then asked what purpose lay behind granting them such advantages. Davy stated that he aimed to transform the barren territory into a profitable venture, believing that the quickest way to generate fast cash was by combining high volume with rarity. The only commodity that met those 2 criteria was the so-called abundance. Even Persalk understood that Davy's strategy was built around balancing mass supply with limited availability. Like her, Manhwa remained puzzled and questioned how their lord intended to accomplish such a plan. The hero clarified that beyond securing basic necessities, he planned to cultivate moonflowers as well. Lunar vegetation cannot thrive on the eastern continent due to its unstable and harsh climate. Moreover, importing moonflowers from the west costs a fortune, since mage towers and alchemists rely on them for sacred potions, making them not only pricey, but extremely limited and fiercely contested. With that in mind, Manhwa insisted it would be impossible to grow those plants locally. However, Davy, the protagonist, held absolute authority over the region's weather conditions. He remarked that his next step was simply to pay a visit to the forest dwellers. Naturally, he meant the elves. Sometime afterward, within elven territory, Uria, leader of the forest elves, mentioned that the spirits had foretold a guest's arrival. Her mentor, Meads, appeared and expressed regret for coming without prior notice. Uria reassured him warmly that he never needed an invitation. She added that she had recently obtained some exceptional tea leaves. As they sipped the tea she prepared, Meads shared that he had experienced a peculiar dream. Curious, she asked what vision had compelled him to travel so far. Her mentor hesitated briefly before responding. He disclosed that in his dream, a curse had descended upon the forest. Uria remembered his teachings that spirits act in accordance with nature, so such events were both natural and inevitable. Yet her mentor stressed that the woodland was steadily withering. He reminded Uria that this was not her true birthplace and urged her to return. He wished to bring her back to their homeland beneath the sacred divine tree. Uria firmly stated that this forest was now her home, and she refused to return to the place he called their origin. She proposed that he escort the remaining elves away, so they might avoid the spreading curse. Meads refused to abandon her, arguing she would not survive if left behind. Uria calmly replied that if that were her fate, it would simply be nature's decision. Her attachment to this land ran deep. She even cherished the hope that someday someone might rescue it. As the vibrant breeze brushed her face, Uria sensed it carried news of a fortunate meeting ahead. Shifting topics, she asked her master whether he enjoyed the tea. He casually revealed that cricket wings were part of its ingredients. Clearly displeased, her master briefly remembered why Uria's bond with the Eastern elves had always been strained. Others often labeled her as excessively devoted to nature. Meanwhile, not far away, the awaited guest drew near. Davy reflected that elves were rarely seen anywhere on the continent. Historical accounts claim they vanished from public sight 3 centuries ago after the Great Incident, leading many to doubt their existence. Still, Davy believed he might locate them since he had sensed spirits observing him during his clash with goblins. To him, the presence of spirits strongly implied that elves must also still exist due to their deep connection. Though he preferred to avoid meeting them, he resolved not to provoke conflict if an encounter occurred. Selk expressed her dislike for elves, describing them as inflexible and obstinate, and Davy found himself agreeing. He suspected Apollon, the elf of doom, was behind past chaos, and what little he knew made him eager to avoid crossing paths with him. After traveling further, he came upon an enchanted woodland that seemed to be the elves' domain. Resident spiritual beings slowly gathered around him. He observed that such entities usually gravitate toward individuals with strong spiritual affinity. Thanks to his purification abilities, they might even favor him more than they would the elves. These abilities were not accidental. as Davy had endured harsh training to obtain them. He had even plunged into flames to build tolerance against extreme heat. Uriya had once been his spiritual mentor at the temple, holding contracts with 13 royal spirits born in human form. Perselk noticed that even without formal contracts, Davy naturally resonated with spirits. Additionally, his possession of dark mana did not disrupt his harmony with benevolent spirits. Perselk asked how he intended to secure lunar flowers, and Davy admitted he was unsure whether they could even sprout seedlings. The moment he said that, a tiny creature gently placed a small blossom in his palm. Startled, Perselk asked if it was truly what she suspected. Davy confirmed that it was indeed a lunar plant. Soon after, they uncovered an entire cave garden overflowing with such flowers. He expressed gratitude to the guiding spirit that had led him there. Perselk realized the supply was plentiful enough to replant near their lands, with plenty remaining. Yet she noticed Davy performing an unusual action and questioned what he was doing. Spiritual energy stems from mana, divine force, and dark mana, and anyone wielding it can perceive spirits. The distinction lies only in how strong one's affinity toward them may be. Thus, the hero could confidently claim there was no spirit beyond his ability to summon. Perselk wondered aloud whether he intended to forge a contract with one. Davy explained that this was the moon goddess's garden, a sanctuary belonging to spirits as its name implied. Harvesting flowers without their approval would bring illness upon the offender. Therefore, he understood he must proceed with caution. Keeping that in mind, he attempted to converse with the resident spirit using its own language. Instantly, a nature spirit appeared, astonished that he could speak in the tongue of spirits. Through that exchange, they successfully opened communication. Davy informed Perselk that permission to harvest had been granted, so he intended to act before the elves noticed. Though confused, Perselk accepted his words, as he insisted it was wiser to avoid complications. Their objective was to gather the plants, not linger in unnecessary discussions. Meanwhile, Uriya reflected that reaching the sacred garden and receiving a spirit's will was truly remarkable. He was even more amazed that the visitor secured consent merely through conversation without prior rituals. What shocked her most was that he was only a human youth. She had never imagined a human discovering the lunar flower garden, let alone gaining its blessing. Now she debated whether she should inform her mentor. Her master noticed her expression and asked what troubled her. She responded by questioning why he had not tasted his tea. He explained she had specially prepared it, drying a dead cricket for a week before boiling it carefully. Despite her effort, her master seemed to disregard her dedication. Still, she cheerfully offered alternatives, mentioning she had recently crafted a new menu. Meads politely declined, silently convinced that Uriya's culinary tastes were rather alarming. Uriya then revealed that a human capable of speaking with spirits had entered the garden and awakened a powerful being from slumber. Her master reacted with clear astonishment. Seeing she was serious, he remarked that dragons had long vanished and become mere myths. Even so, he considered a surviving dragon more believable than a human fluent in the language of spirits. Meads admitted humans could be unusual, yet none had ever communicated with spirits before, insisting such bonds belonged solely to elves. Nevertheless, Uriya declared she would leave the village temporarily, as the moment she awaited had finally arrived. She believed this person might be the one destined to lift the curse. Turning to the protagonist, he questioned how a task meant to take 4 days had been finished within half a day, and his companion explained that the workers admired their lord and wished to repay his kindness. Davy could hardly object since this was the outcome he desired, though he recognized it was unsustainable long-term. The cultivation of lunar buds began in full swing, and watchmen assisted in setting up plantations, yet whispers of suspicion spread across the land. This made the protagonist wonder whether the plants would truly take root in his domain. New lunar buds required up to 5 months to mature and needed spiritual energy to bloom, but his aim was to market only the leaves rather than the entire plant. Moan Mater informed him they lacked the expertise to properly grow lunar plants. He added that the leaves were gradually wilting. Davy confidently predicted that rainfall would soon come and resolve the issue. A few days passed without a single drop of rain, and instead the heat intensified, causing the laborers to grow increasingly anxious. Even so, the hero remained calm, having manipulated the region's weather for the last 4 months and keeping the temperature exactly as he wished, leaving no room for concern. Before long, rumors spread that lunar plants were now being grown within the Hind's domain. Furthermore, the aristocracy was aware that the territory's current lord was personally overseeing the entire venture. Sage Harrison, the head of the Red Mage Tower, appeared and inquired whether they were referring to the land that had been cursed 5 years prior. The young man replied that rain had reportedly fallen there, suggesting the curse had finally been lifted. A noblewoman commented that even if that were true, The soil was so devastated it would take at least a decade before prosperity could return. She added that the territory's ruler was the eldest prince of Rome, and speculated he must have lost his sanity after being exiled there. The Tower Master's aide clarified that the prince in question was Davy. Harrison immediately silenced him, reminding everyone they had been the first to receive this intelligence. Therefore, if something noteworthy was unfolding in the east, it could prove extremely advantageous to them. With that in mind, he instructed his assistant to begin making the necessary arrangements. Returning to the protagonist, he observed that a once desolate, cursed field had transformed into a thriving garden of spiritual blooms. Due to the limited number of seeds, they barely broke even on costs, though the increasing sale of leaves brought some relief. Amy reported that nearly 20,000 leaves were already stored, with another 10,000 nearing harvest. Davy calculated that the market rate stood at 4 leaves for 100 gold coins. At that price, 10,000 leaves translated to 250,000 standard coins, or 5,000 platinum coins. Comparison, an ordinary household could survive 2 weeks on a single gold coin, while 5 gold coins could sustain them comfortably for a month. Unlike the spiritual stones, he chose to sell the leaves openly as part of a legitimate enterprise. He even deliberately circulated rumors portraying himself as foolish, ensuring others dismissed him and refrained from meddling. Purcell cautioned that such a ploy would not succeed a second time, and Davy replied they had to capitalize on it while they could. He was also confident that every other preparation had been completed. His aim was to draw the entire continent's attention to his merchandise. After all, lunar leaves were sold at most twice a month, and even then the supply never satisfied the demands of 2 continents. As essential components for magical catalysts, alchemical processes, and church elixirs, the availability of such leaves nearby should have been extraordinary news. However, alongside a major shipment, he released yet another rumor. Soon whispers spread that the lord behind the booming leaf trade had fallen gravely ill and was confined to bed. Davy considered this deception a necessary sacrifice. It was common knowledge that scarce luxury goods would lose value rapidly once supply increased. If he distributed them freely without restraint, the market price would inevitably collapse. To preserve high prices, he sought to engineer a temporary shortage so he could dictate terms when sales resumed. In the chaos, a large crowd gathered outside the Lord's residence. Within days of the rumors spread, the region had fallen into disarray. Merchant guilds, organizations, and even clergy arrived demanding clarification. Amy explained she had told them the Lord was bedridden, yet they still demanded access to the goods. Davy realized immediate action was necessary. Summoning his aides, he questioned Moan Miter about the territory's security measures. They replied that they were doing all they could, but required additional personnel at the checkpoints. Managing such a sudden influx of visitors was proving overwhelming. Davy ordered that anyone behaving suspiciously be removed, knowing he held the upper hand and need not tolerate disorder. Still, he understood the importance of preserving diplomatic relations. When he asked about accommodations, he was told every inn was full and even vacant houses had been occupied, yet space remained insufficient. He proposed setting up tent camps using their supplies and instructed the butler to charge reasonable lodging fees. Before Monmeter departed, Davy requested a private word. He produced a small vial containing a potion, indicating that it required discussion. Later that evening, the captain of the guard visited a local inn. His subordinates invited him to drink, but Moan Miter declined, saying he needed rest. He retreated to his room and collapsed onto the bed, claiming exhaustion. He reflected on his demanding schedule, from morning therapy with Master Berman to afternoon drills and evening etiquette lessons, feeling utterly overwhelmed. He had never experienced such relentless work before. Just as he began to relax, a visitor arrived requesting an audience with the captain. The man apologized courteously for the intrusion. He introduced himself as Hollis, a 4th-grade expert from the Green Tower. He stated he wished to discuss certain matters privately with Monmeter. Hollis praised the captain's flawless management, while acknowledging the difficulty of overseeing so many guests, adding that the Lord was fortunate to rely on him. Despite the flattery, Moan Miter modestly described himself as merely a minor knight. To his request, Hollis expressed a desire to meet the Lord, but noted that access to his chambers was restricted. He asked whether Moan Miter might assist in arranging such a meeting. Captain replied that the Lord had collapsed from overwork and would receive no visitors until recovered, as his health took precedence. Hollis claimed he understood, yet insisted the Green Tower could not afford delays. He placed a pouch filled with coins and jewels on the table. Moan Miter promptly declared he did not accept bribes. Hollis countered that it was merely a token of goodwill, asking only for friendship in return. The captain said he was unaccustomed to such generosity, but Hollis urged him to view it as compensation for his hard work. He added that he would not miss the money and trusted the captain would put it to good use. Nevertheless, Moan Miter had anticipated precisely this scenario. He realized events were unfolding exactly as his lord had predicted. During their earlier private talk, Davy had warned him that as his trusted aide, he would soon be targeted by those seeking to sway him. Davy explained that bribes and pressure were inevitable, urging the captain to discreetly identify those attempting to influence him. He instructed Moan Miter to accept such offers, feign cooperation, and later report the culprits' identities. Additionally, he told him to present a specific item while pretending to assist them. Davy clarified that it was an enchanted potion valued at 100 gold coins per vial. Rather than selling it outright, the goal was to spark conversation and circulate its reputation among influential circles. His objective was to elevate the perceived worth of his goods and prolong their presence in the local market. Returning to the present, Moan Miter displayed the potion to Hollis, described it as a refined raw material soon to enter commercial distribution. Upon inspection, Hollis declared it undeniably a superior grade item. He admitted he had never encountered such exceptional quality anywhere on the continent. Internally, he resolved to secure priority access regardless of cost. Observing Hollis's amazement, Moan Miter emphasized the Lord's dedication in crafting it. He added that any product failing strict standards was discarded as fertilizer, with another 10,000 units ready for sale. Hollis calculated that half of the original 20,000 grams had been rejected, considering such decisiveness impressive for a 17-year-old ruler. He concluded that missing this opportunity would be foolish. Moan Miter mentioned the Lord planned to auction the current stock before resuming production. Hollis assumed certain buyers would receive preference, though Moan Miter claimed ignorance of specifics. Hollis responded that he had heard enough and assured that the Green Tower would compensate Moan Miter generously. With that promise, he departed from the captain's quarters. Moan Miter was astonished at how flawlessly the Lord's scheme had succeeded. The following day, he reported everything to Davy, who remarked that greed made human behavior easy to anticipate. He had simply showcased desirable goods to attract wealthy patrons. Moan Miter revealed he had also received bribes from envoys of other territories, besides the Green Tower. Davy told him to keep the funds as personal earnings, unconcerned with how they were spent. Since the majority of profits from leaf sales already belonged to him, he had no issue letting Moan Miter retain the extra, valuing loyalty above all. Purcell questioned whether he was confident about confronting larger factions. He answered affirmatively, explaining that once the rumors circulated, many would pursue long-term contracts. Branch offices of various towers and alchemical guilds would seek to establish themselves in the area. Once empty land would evolve into a thriving hub, bringing increased revenue and population growth. Davy reflected that the ancient curse had effectively preserved the territory for him, leaving only the task of managing its new administration. Eventually, Ulysses, an ally of the Red Tower Master, reported that other magic towers intended to invest heavily in the Hines region and relocate there. Unsure whether to follow suit, he hesitated, but his mentor reassured him that even as an elder Ulyss remained overly cautious, reminding him that mistakes were natural and trusting him to choose wisely. Ulysses, however, insisted it was illogical for the regional lord to cling to the idea of auctioning his merchandise. He argued that direct sales would yield greater profit given the need for capital, making the auction strategy appear as though the lord was intentionally lowering his own product's value. Ulyss struggled to grasp the reasoning behind this approach, unaware that the protagonist was secretly conducting direct trade with the Western continent. In contrast to Ulysses, his master believed the lord possessed far more intelligence than he let on. Harrison pointed out that Hines was a small territory with a limited population. Since residents could only purchase what circulated locally, the lord was speeding up regional development while conserving as much wealth as possible. Additionally, Hines's position between major trade routes offered strategic benefits, and with various towers establishing branches there, it could evolve into a thriving commercial hub. Harrison explained that limiting production prevented powerful factions from buying in bulk and reselling at inflated prices. He added that the lord aimed to gather substantial funds quickly in order to secure long-term plans. Behaved like someone with nothing to lose, taking calculated risks, suggesting that leaf production was merely the first phase. Harrison further noted that the lord likely had other ventures in mind, and even if it were a bluff, he would still benefit in the end. Hearing this, Ulysses decided he needed to establish ties with the lord and concluded an immediate meeting was necessary. His master agreed, expressing his own interest in speaking with the young ruler and instructing his disciple to arrange it. After finishing with Yuli's, the sage recalled being asked whether a young man with barely any visible mana could defeat a high-level vampire in a single strike. Alina had been troubled by that question since encountering the protagonist and sought Harrison's insight. Moreover, Davy had wielded a borrowed sword without forming a contract with Calderus, deepening suspicions surrounding him. Reflecting on it, Harrison reasoned such a feat was possible only if the youth were trained by the sword god or perhaps was the sword god incarnate. Combining this with everything he knew about Prince Davy, the sage felt the puzzle pieces were aligning. Not long after, applications for housing in Hines began pouring in, along with offers to purchase nearby land. Some individuals even clashed over ownership claims. Overwhelmed, Amy sought guidance, and Davy instructed her to auction the plots to the highest bidder. The butler then inquired about the appropriate starting price. Davy suggested beginning at the highest reasonable figure, believing true wealth was reflected in vast estates. He also viewed governance as a business that required maximizing returns. Before departing, Amy informed him a message had arrived. It was an official letter from the royal palace. Soon after she announced the public auction, the opening bid was set at 90 gold coins. A rival immediately matched the offer. A member of the Green Tower swiftly raised it. Then an envoy from the Alchemist Academy pushed the price even higher. Two factions had competed fiercely from the start, and the auction only intensified their hostility, each increase bringing them closer to open conflict. Amy declared the current offer stood at 130 gold coins, and warned the land would be sold if no higher bid came. Amid the heated bidding, Hollis watched closely. For a moment, it seemed his final offer had secured victory. Yet at the very last instant, another bidder stepped forward and surpassed him. Meanwhile, Davy received word that the Alu Trading Group agreed to purchase at 150 gold coins per vial, credited the outcome to his coordinated strategy with Moan Metter, noting that property sales mirrored the pace of rising districts in the capital. He felt satisfied with profits gained from both ventures. If the trend continued, Hines could generate nearly 1.5 million gold annually, making it the kingdom's wealthiest territory. With that prospect, he resolved to maintain leaf production at its current scale. He also planned to clear additional land for diverse crops, believing balance between supply and demand was essential. He instructed his team to demolish unusable buildings and repair viable ones ahead of a major renovation. Later, he reflected on the royal letter, which praised achievements previously ignored and promised suitable rewards. However, it required his presence at the palace to receive them formally. Davy burned the letter immediately, questioning the audacity of such praise after his exile. He suspected the Marquis was maneuvering politically and saw the message as an attempt at reconciliation. Noticing the seal lacked the king's personal mark, he decided to visit anyway, as it aligned with his broader plans. Besides, the kingdom lay along his intended route. A memory resurfaced of Surtur, one of his mentors, constructing a hidden dungeon beneath his final residence. Surtur had died before completing it, and asked Davy to finish the project in his stead. Claimed that once completed, Davy could use it freely, reveal it, or sell it to the highest bidder. Though Davy doubted his ability, Surtur insisted the boy's stubbornness surpassed his own, and entrusted him with the task. He promised that upon completion, ownership and control would belong entirely to Davy. In the present, the butler urged him to take escorts, but Davy chose to travel alone. Before leaving, he asked the butler to watch over Amy and ensure she rested properly. The butler replied that teaching Amy was enjoyable, praising her intelligence and admitting he regarded her like family. Hearing this, Davy felt reassured about her safety. With everything settled, he set off on his journey. Midway, Purcell noticed he had changed direction and questioned whether he was taking a shortcut. Davy explained he needed to stop somewhere before reaching the Royal Road, describing it as a rare preserved site maintained by the Alliance. He was referring to Valishad, the homeland of the blacksmith Surtur. Knowing Purcell was raised as Harris's daughter, he assumed she might have encountered Surtur before. Confirmed, recalling that Surtur claimed the region was forged from the same material as the holy sword calderas. Davy corrected her, saying the land had belonged to Surtur millennia ago. Now it was under Queen Linus's control. Moreover, it was populated by Varietas, all of whom were hostile to him. Therefore, he intended to enter in disguise to avoid recognition. He joined the queue at the entrance, presenting forged credentials as a mercenary named Davy. He believed his disguise would suffice if his face went unnoticed. Yet he was unexpectedly halted at the gate. The guard claimed the area was restricted due to exploration of a newly discovered labyrinth. He warned Davy not to meddle and forced him away. Confused, Davy questioned the situation. Irritated, he stood staring at the entrance in contemplation. Even by noble standards, he found the place appallingly mismanaged. Suddenly, an elderly man approached him. The stranger remarked that Davy must be from afar to be unaware of local customs. The old man gestured toward the line. Someone was discreetly slipping coins to the guards. He explained that bribery was the only way inside. Davy reflected that recent reforms should have abolished such corruption. The old man commented on the chilling intensity in Davy's eyes. He handed Davy a small item, instructing him to give it to the guards. Though modest, it would secure entry, and he advised avoiding unnecessary trouble. He added that Davy reminded him of his grandson, hence his kindness. Davy expressed sincere gratitude, discreetly returned a few coins to the old man. He understood the guards sought more than mere money. Once more, he approached the gatekeepers, stated that collecting payments was unlawful unless officially sanctioned as processing fees. The guard mocked him as naive and asked what he intended to do. Davy warned them this was their final opportunity to avoid severe punishment under national law. He demanded they return the collected bribes and confess. As the guards laughed, Davy felt slight embarrassment but remained firm in procedure. The captain of the guards then drew his blade. He threatened that killing the boy would have no consequences and told him to mind his own business. Davy calmly asked whether he wished to live as an outlaw, to which the guard arrogantly replied that they themselves were the law. Moreover, they insisted they were simply carrying out Duke Barrietta's directives. Just as the guard prepared to strike, the elderly man from before stepped in to stop him. He argued that the protagonist was merely a youngster and did not deserve such harsh treatment. Irritated by the interruption, the guard shifted his focus. Instead of attacking Davy, he aimed his weapon at the old man. Davy quickly intervened and knocked the sword from the guard's grasp. He added that targeting a defenseless elder was even more disgraceful than taking bribes. Furthermore, intimidating a lawful citizen was equivalent to betraying the kingdom itself. Davy seized the fallen blade firmly and proclaimed that the guard must answer for his offenses. After subduing him, he declared that all accomplices would face identical consequences. He warned the others not to escalate matters and to summon their superior immediately. Rather than comply, the remaining guards encircled him. Davy calmly observed that they had chosen the most troublesome path. He warned that their crimes were severe enough to implicate even their descendants. When they refused to retreat, he launched his attack without hesitation. Even then, he offered them one last opportunity. He ordered them to call their captain before matters worsened. Moments later, a figure arrived demanding to know the cause of the disturbance. Davy tossed an identification pendant toward him and advised him to consider his next move carefully. Viscount Goretta instantly dropped to his knees, recognizing the prince's insignia. He begged forgiveness, blaming the misconduct on the region's stagnation. Davy countered that this land housed the famed thousand-day and night market, prized by the Alliance, so such excuses were absurd. Viscount protested that without prior notice of inspection, the prince's actions constituted overreach. Davy asked whether the overseer required formal authorization to enforce justice. Frustrated, the Viscount answered yes, insisting Duke Barrietta would never tolerate such interference. Davy sensed deliberate obstruction. He suspected the territory's dominance intimidated inspectors into silence. The Viscount then attempted to placate him with flattery. However, Davy mentioned recent rumors and declared himself merciless when crossed, leaving the Viscount bewildered. In the next instant, he struck down the Viscount. Davy remarked coldly that the man had squandered his final words. Later, the old man guided a cart along the road. He recounted that a decade earlier, the region had been peaceful until Baron Alishad of the royal line passed away. Refugees soon flooded in, corruption followed, and those opposing the newcomers suffered retaliation. His own son had fallen victim to this turmoil. Davy realized the old man helped him because he resembled that lost son. He observed that the son must have been compassionate, judging by the story. Before long, they reached a marked location. Davy announced he had finally located the ruins of Valharashad. It was once the legendary market of 1,000 days and nights. The old man worried about repercussions from earlier events, but Davy dismissed concerns, claiming the local duke rarely intervened. The old man expressed gratitude for being saved and for avenging his son, feeling deeply indebted. Davy simply urged him to continue living honorably. They then parted ways. Marcel commented that the tale was tragic, and Davy agreed but believed brighter days lay ahead. He felt he had made a meaningful difference there. Entering the ruins of Valharashad, Davy admired its breathtaking scenery. He climbed to gain a sweeping view of the landscape. He was surprised by how much remained preserved. This prompted him to jot down detailed notes, Marcel questioned the value of searching ruins already excavated. Davy insisted something undiscovered still lingered beneath the surface. Soon he detected a hidden cryptographic pattern. Marcel admitted she had no idea what that meant. He explained the area was encoded to conceal secrets accessible only to those who deciphered it. Observing from above allowed him to perceive the concealed designs. Surtur had devised the code, and although some once understood it, now only Davy possessed that knowledge. Convinced he alone could uncover the true treasure, he followed the clues toward a specific point. He discovered a concealed entrance beneath the central anvil. Access required a particular passphrase. Davy believed Surtur had left a testament promising his fortune to whoever uncovered his legacy. Thought made him feel like a conquering pirate king. Opening the hidden passage, he recognized the immense craftsmanship invested in the structure. Enchantments reinforced it against subterranean pressure, and a system supplied breathable air. He imagined only someone who knew Surtur could have found it. Otherwise, it would have remained lost. Deeper inside, he stumbled upon something significant. Herselk remarked it resembled a dwelling rather than a prison. Davy recalled Surtur, proudly calling himself a forge maniac. After Harris's death, Surtur built this refuge and devoted his remaining years to a single unfinished masterpiece. Though his body perished, everything he left behind remained perfectly preserved. Amid exploration, Herselk uncovered a chamber resembling an altar. Davy speculated Surtur may have revered a forgotten forge deity. As he approached, a mechanism was triggered. Arcane energy burst forth from a chest within the room. Herselk confessed she had never witnessed consciousness manifest so intensely. Davy's system alerted him to imminent peril. Yet he recalled that while humans knew Surtur as the thousand-day blacksmith, dwarves called him the devil's smith. Ordinary smiths boasted of brute strength alone. Surtur, however, harnessed mana to transcend conventional forging limits, shattered his boundaries, and earned heroic acclaim, entrusting Davy to complete his final creation. Davy then opened the chest. Inside lay a crimson nameless blade that annihilated the living. Beside it rested a blue blade that commanded the dead. Twin swords were unfinished masterpieces. Examining their status, Davy sensed their latent power had yet to awaken fully. Herselk suggested the earlier cries originated from them, and Davy confirmed they were living swords akin to calderas. Calderas, Surtur's finest work, had been forged from Harris's very essence. These blades differed, crafted without a designated wielder. Thus, they were destined to seek their own masters. Herselk observed that they appeared complete. Davy knew otherwise. He insisted final refinements were still required. To achieve that, he would need flames. Not ordinary fire, but an exceptionally intense blaze. Only one place possessed such heat: Dwarves' Forge. Departing the ruins, Davy set off toward a new direction. Guide informed him that following the main road would lead directly to the plaza he sought. Davy expressed his gratitude and resumed his journey. As they traveled, he asked Herselk what she believed would come of the royal summons. She answered that his enterprise was generating immense profit, so the court likely intended to reward him as the letter claimed. After all, within months, he had produced more revenue than the kingdom earned in a year, and his tax contributions had caught the attention of the elite. Because of that, they would probably attempt to persuade him to hand the business over to the state to enrich the crown. However, she knew he already understood this and suspected he asked merely to pass the time. Davy admitted he was surprised by the continent's focus on him, though he recognized it was due to the scale of his success. Sometime later, he reached his homeland and was received formally. Chief Chamberlain welcomed him, and Davy noted it had been some time since he last saw Bisfuse. Bisfuse remarked that the prince had grown, not only physically but in influence thanks to his achievements. Davy replied modestly that perhaps fortune favored him, and he had simply seized the opportunity. Shifting topics, Bisfuse mentioned valuable palace records had recently been stolen. The king's fury had led to stripped titles and looming executions for implicated nobles, and he advised Davy to wait until morning to seek an audience. Davy reflected that even if Marquis Paltris played a role, such decisive measures required the king's approval. It seemed the king had stopped restraining himself and was acting decisively at last. Lost in thought, Davy collided with someone. Prince Carlos had come specifically to confront him. Though displeased, Davy agreed to speak privately and dismissed the butler despite his hesitation. Carlos accused Davy of becoming arrogant after a single successful venture. He sneered that Davy was merely fortunate and claimed any commoner could have outperformed him. Davy retorted that such remarks reeked of jealousy, added that unlike himself, Carlos relied on his mother for everything and accomplished nothing independently. Enraged, Carlos called him insane and lunged forward. Davy shoved him back, declaring that Carlos was the one behaving irrationally. He accused Carlos of living in delusion, inflated by sycophants who valued only his title. Davy emphasized he built his success alone, unlike Carlos who inherited comfort without effort. Furious, Carlos attacked again. Davy recalled the arrow incident from 6 years prior and felt irritation resurface. Rather than evade, he struck back directly. Carlos was knocked flat onto the floor. Davy remarked that Carlos's behavior dishonored their father. He reminded him of his habit of belittling him as a mere commoner. He pointed out that half his bloodline came from the king himself. Seizing the moment, he pinned Carlos down. Still, Carlos rose stubbornly. Davy flicked his forehead sharply. The simple gesture caused him to yelp in pain. Bleeding slightly, Carlos spat threats at him. Davy asked calmly whether he hadn't suffered enough. Carlos stormed off, swearing revenge. Selk wondered if Davy had disciplined him sufficiently. Smiling faintly, Davy replied he had only toyed with him. Selk was startled to realize he had enjoyed it. She warned him not to laugh that way again lest he frighten someone. Davy shrugged, unaware it was unsettling. He casually mentioned placing a curse on Carlos that magic could not dispel. Selk asked what he had done exactly. Davy answered that he had given his brother a present that would reveal itself at the assembly. The following day, nobles assembled in the royal hall. They debated how to utilize and profit from the wealth Davy had generated. The king remained silent for a time. Selk noticed Davy was discussed as though absent. She observed Marquis Patris was missing, the only noble who had shown him sympathy. This absence made her uneasy about the kingdom's direction. Davy mused that perhaps he should open a restaurant next, having heard food ventures were lucrative. He admitted he lacked expertise in that field. King finally spoke, declaring Davy must be honored before further deliberations and thanked him publicly. Davy replied he had merely fulfilled his duty. The king insisted his accomplishments surpassed any in a decade and offered to grant any request. Davy sensed the promise lacked sincerity. He requested time to consider his desired reward. The king praised the prudence and agreed. Discussion resumed regarding investment in the lunar enterprise. Selk whispered it was worse than she feared. Duke Virietta, leader of the nobles, rose to speak and proposed clarifying one issue first. He argued they had grown excited without assessing fundamentals. Though innovative, the venture should not be absorbed by the state without its creator's consent. Ferrandez countered that royalty held ultimate authority. Virietta challenged him by asking if he would surrender all his own assets for the kingdom's benefit. He concluded that Lord Davy alone should decide the matter. Selk thought someone finally supported him, but Davy suspected ulterior motives. Virietta warned that forced nationalization would discourage entrepreneurship. Davy noted that the Duke had more to add. Virietta agreed and suggested mediation was necessary. He revealed a letter from High Priest Valsius of the Sacred Kingdom. It invited Davy to confirm his stigma and receive the title of saint. Duke Rhonda objected, calling it absurd to send a prince away. Another noble insisted they could not defy a kingdom that served the god Priya. Rhonda argued that compliance would make them appear subordinate. Davy said they exaggerated the consequences of recognition. Virietta responded that as royalty, Davy bore obligations. He added they had nothing to gain by offending the sacred kingdom. He recommended accepting the request. The nobles then questioned the fate of Davy's enterprise. The Duke explained that sainthood would legally bar Davy from ruling Hines. A replacement lord would need to be appointed. The nobles quickly grasped his intention and voiced support. Davy recognized their scheme and found the development intriguing. Virietta stressed Hines was now the kingdom's most critical region and required a suitable ruler. He proposed a single candidate. Carlos, the second prince, was nominated to govern. Davy saw through it, knowing Carlos was Virietta's grandson and would enable privatization for profit. He also knew other nobles sought similar gains. At that moment, Carlos entered the hall. He knelt theatrically before the king, ensuring Davy witnessed it. But something unexpected occurred. Before the court, Carlos began behaving oddly. When he attempted to speak, animalistic sounds escaped his mouth. Instead of praise, he suffered humiliation at the worst possible time. At last, Selk pieces together what Davy did to his brother the previous evening. Davy comments that she seems to be laughing far more than necessary. Carlos's grandfather, however, is not amused at all and demands to know how he can act so disgracefully during such a crucial assembly. Carlos attempts to defend himself, yet whenever he speaks he ends up mimicking animal sounds, making his humiliation impossible to conceal. Enraged, the king refuses to listen further and commands the guards to escort Carlos out immediately. He further proclaims that Carlos will remain under probation indefinitely. with no chance to contest the decision. In persisting with his excuses, Carlos only deepens his disgrace and drags his family's reputation down with him, as if the situation were not already dire. While he is being dragged away, Carlos's hat slips from his head onto the floor. For once, the crowd gasps at the unexpected sight. The man famous for his flowing hair is suddenly revealed to be completely bald, having tried to conceal it beneath his hat. With the hat gone, his secret is exposed to all present. Taking advantage of the moment, Davy declares that his brother lacks the maturity required to govern the Hin's territory as its lord. The statement infuriates Varietta beyond measure. Davy goes further and questions whether the authority of a count surpasses that of the king. Observing Varietta's stunned reaction, the prince presses on, asking whether the kingdom itself belongs to him. The count denies it, insisting that the prince has misunderstood his intentions. He argues that everything he has done serves the kingdom's interests. But Davy counters by questioning why the count holds a letter from the Holy Kingdom that even the king has not reviewed. He continues by accusing the count of covertly siding with the nobles while pretending neutrality, making it clear he finds his claims untrustworthy. Trapped by the accusations, Varietta demands to know what the prince is implying. Davy bluntly asserts that the count's true aim was to sell the nation, in accordance with the Holy Kingdom's demands. He adds that the count intended to seize control of Davy's enterprise in the process. Davy insists the count is no different from the corrupt nobles and announces he already has a plan to handle the Holy Kingdom. The king inquires about the details of the prince's proposal. Davy answers that the Holy Kingdom's people are merely human, and even their high priest does not outrank a king. Then the prince produces a crystal orb and uses it to place a call. Through it, he establishes contact with Father Velium from the Holy Kingdom's administrative office. Davy apologizes for the abrupt communication and asks whether the Pope has reached a decision on the matter previously discussed. Even before receiving a reply, he understands that commerce is necessary everywhere, including sacred lands. Despite the high priest's prominence, Davy bypassed him and reached out directly to the Pope, the highest authority in the Holy Kingdom. Father Velium explains that the high priest acted independently without papal approval and assures that such overreach will not occur again. With that clarification, the conference ends and the high priest's letter loses all significance. Once alone, Davy takes a moment to express his gratitude to the priest for his assistance. Velium remarks that, while inviting the prince might not have been disadvantageous, they never seriously intended to summon him to the Holy Kingdom. In truth, they concluded that Davy provides greater value remaining where he currently stands. Davy had also informed the Pope that abandoning the Hin's region would halt plant cultivation, something the Pope wishes to avoid. Additionally, he pledged to deliver a special consignment to the Holy Kingdom. Velium expresses appreciation for the partnership and mentions the Pope's desire to continue purchasing in bulk. Davy recognizes that nothing about this deal is sacred. It is purely transactional, yet that does not trouble him. Since he built the enterprise to generate revenue, he is content to sell as long as payment is made. His primary goal is to earn steady profits with minimal effort, caring chiefly about favorable outcomes. Using the crystal sphere again, Davy reaches out to Amy. She cries out anxiously until the butler steps in, reminding her that she must not display weakness. The butler then apologizes, explaining that he is managing affairs at the estate. Davy informs them that the meeting concluded successfully and that he will soon head back to Hines. Meanwhile, the butler reports that the visitors have been relocated to provisional tents and that building permits are secured, with construction about to commence. However, he raises concerns about infrastructure upgrades, doubting the Lord's ambitious plans can be completed swiftly due to time constraints. Davy reflects that although he revived the territory, Hines remains technologically outdated and stagnant. The butler estimates that fulfilling all the requests would require a decade or two, as the issue cannot be resolved merely by spending money. Realizing his wealth lacks practical outlets, Davy decides it is time to launch a second enterprise. He plans to leverage the expertise and innovations of the continent's finest engineers, armed with an offer too tempting to decline. Essentially, he intends to exchange corn for diamonds, believing that few investments surpass simple stones in yielding high returns with minimal risk. Sometime afterward, Davy journeys to the lands of the Yellow Rock tribe. The settlement belongs to dwarves dwelling in the kingdom's northern reaches. Often dubbed master craftsmen, dwarves are reputed for their strength exceeding that of humans and their remarkable tolerance for heat. Celebrated for engineering prowess and unlike the mythical elves, dwarves maintain limited but real contact with humanity. Still, their interactions are largely confined to trade, so only nobles or royal envoys typically deal with them. Gaining authorization to enter a dwarf tribe was the reward Davy requested from the king. Rather than pursuing the throne, he chose this alternative path, knowing that without such permission the dwarves would never welcome him so readily, as they are notoriously difficult to approach. When he presented this request, both the king and the nobles were cautious, aware that offending the dwarves could permanently sever relations. Davy assured them he understood the risks, which was precisely why he sought this particular favor. He further expressed confidence that he could at least secure entry past their gates despite widespread doubt. Herselk recalls noticing that every noble shared the same skeptical thought when the request was made. They all speculated about Davy's intentions, and even dispatched several soldiers to monitor him during his venture into dwarf territory. They are correct in one respect. Davy truly has grand ambitions that may leave the nobles at a disadvantage. Upon arriving at the domain of the Yellow Rock tribe, the prince's envoy announces his presence and seeks permission for entry. A guard dwarf named Gerrit remarks that he has never encountered the prince before. Davy courteously introduces himself and states he has come bearing an offer too compelling to ignore. After inspecting the prince's carriage, the dwarf quickly identifies the goods it carries. Realizing the prince is serious, he nonetheless explains that internal troubles prevent the tribe from entering any agreements at present. Nevertheless, he grants the prince leave to step inside. He instructs him to continue on foot and leave the horses beyond the entrance. As Davy walks into the dwarven settlement, Gerrit informs him that the elder has agreed to receive him. Shortly thereafter, he escorts Davy to the elder's residence, where the prince observes that the quarters are modest yet comfortable. Within the chamber, the 8th elder Golda is waiting for him. A single glance, Davy can tell that the dwarf is hardly inclined toward friendly discussion. Still, he considers it odd that only a single chief is present, since he is convinced the clan is ruled by several dwarves. So he decides to introduce himself properly before raising any inquiries. With that decided, the hero offers an exceptionally courteous introduction, addressing the chief using the traditional dwarven manner of greeting. Golda is taken aback, having believed humans were ignorant of dwarven customs, and he realizes he is standing before a man of integrity. He remarks that visitors like this are uncommon, and politely invites the prince to take a seat. He explains that the remaining elders are occupied elsewhere, which is why he alone is in the chamber. Wasting no time, Golda notes that formal dealings are typically arranged beyond the village borders, and asks what purpose has brought the prince here. Davy replies that the scheduled trade talks are still months away, and that his presence is unrelated, as he has come with personal matters in mind. He adds that he brought offerings, including meat, ale, and various supplies. Golda responds that he respects humans who understand proper courtesy toward dwarves, and he especially appreciates good beer. Yet he admits that his clan currently faces complicated issues and cannot respond to outside requests. Moreover, he states that he is unable to disclose further details. Even so, considering the long journey the prince has made, he permits him to remain in the village for several days to recover. He warns, however, that any trouble will result in immediate expulsion. After saying this, Golda departs from the room. The protagonist then takes the chance to assess the dwarf's condition. Through this, he learns that Golda was compelled by the others to meet him alone. In truth, Golda did appreciate the courtesy and gifts the human display. Nonetheless, his deepest concern revolves around the Flame of Beginnings, the artifact revered as the dwarves' sacred sword. Long ago, Surtur had spoken of crafting something together with the dwarves. At that time, his skills were still lacking, so the final product was far from perfect. Even so, they were so proud of completing it that they celebrated for days, an achievement that meant a great deal to Surtur. In the present, while residing in the dwarven settlement, the protagonist admits he never expected to hear about the Sword of the Blaze of Beginning here. Davy recalls hearing once that the blade was never sharpened, forged jointly by Surtur and the dwarves as their first shared creation and a mark of unity. The sword was never intended to cut. Additionally, the weapon preserves fragments of Surtur's memories. More intriguing still, it was merely an experimental model. It served as the prototype for calderas, and although its construction differed from ordinary blades, the foundational technique remained consistent. The process relied on shaping items through mana, blending tangible and intangible realms, and even the tools and iron involved were unlike any others. Essentially, such craftsmanship demands that a smith pursue insight beyond conventional limits, something stubborn dwarves would rarely attempt. Therefore, they must be struggling to decipher the method behind its making, likely the very issue Golda alluded to. For now, though, the protagonist decides to head outside for a while. Besides seeking the dwarves' expertise for his domain's growth, he has another objective in mind. He aims to gain entry to the Great Forge, the legendary furnace built through the dwarves' most advanced techniques. Anticipating opposition when approaching the dwarves, Davy had already devised a strategy. Leaving his lodging, he makes his way toward a tavern. Golda spots him there and questions what the prince is up to. Davy inquires whether Golda has a moment to spare. The dwarf answers that proper rest is essential to work well, and since his brother Golgotha chased off the elders, he is taking the chance to drink. Hearing that, the protagonist asks to share a drink with him. He also mentions having heard that dwarven spirits are famously potent, and requests to taste them. Some dwarves mutter that the prince has no idea what he is stepping into. Others remark that he must be reckless to challenge their liquor. Davy simply finds their chatter irritating. Server brings the drink, cautioning that dwarven alcohol far exceeds what humans typically handle. The protagonist brushes it off and empties the cup in a single swallow. He declares that all alcohol ought to have such strength. The dwarves stare in amazement, having expected him to collapse. Purcell questions if that is truly all, and Davy admits it is strong but poorly flavored. He rarely drinks much, yet he understands one clear truth. Dwarves have a particular fondness for both gambling and drinking. With that in mind, he challenges Golda to a contest to see who can consume more. Golda states that dwarves honor those who can handle their drink, accepts the wager, and offers to cover every round so the cups keep flowing. Regardless of the outcome, the protagonist believes wagers are the quickest path to building trust and securing what he seeks from the elder. Golda counters that if the prince loses, he must leave the village at once. But if he wins, any request will be granted, emphasizing it is not personal, though the timing is unfortunate. To Davy, this is perfect, as the dwarf has taken the bait. The following morning, Golda is irritated at having lost. He never thought a human would outdrink him, and now he must keep his word. Davy knows his sacred mana prevents him from becoming intoxicated, though he keeps that secret. He recalls learning this resilience from his sword master, the legendary Kaon Madakajan, who unified Zhongyuan and was famed for both skill and drinking prowess. Even Daphne, the immortal saint renowned for her love of wine, refused to compete with Chinmadoko Jun in drinking. The issue was that during his training, alcohol became inseparable from Davy's practice. His master insisted he drink as part of mastering the blade. This only intensified the hardship of his training. Compared to such a mentor, the dwarves pose no challenge. In any case, Golda chooses to honor the agreement and asks what the prince wants. First, Davy asks whether their internal conflict stems from the sword of the blaze of beginning, and Golda confirms it does. He explains that although the dwarves safeguarded it, the blade ultimately shattered. It had passed through various tribes before reaching them, and his father was the last guardian. After his father's untimely death, the duty fell to Golda and his elder brother Golgotha. The dwarf encourages the prince to inquire about anything else, expressing openness to discussion. As anticipated, courtesy has been returned with courtesy, and Davy feels drinking together was a wise move that earned Golda's notice. He then mentions that while not a master craftsman, he does have forging knowledge. He asks for permission to assist in the effort to restore the broken blade. Sometime later, Davy is escorted to the central forge. Upon arrival, Perselk marvels that the dwarves constructed such a place without relying on mana or alchemy. Several dwarves resent a human entering the forge, suspecting Golda has lost his senses. Davy even feels a hint of guilt for placing the leader in such a position. At that moment, Golgotha appears and questions his brother's decision to bring a human inside. Golda admits he lost a wager and that the prince only wishes to see the forge. The others protest that this is the primary forge and argue Golda must still be drunk. He firmly denies it, swearing by his rank as elder and urging them to trust the prince as he has. Golgotha then orders the dwarves to return to their tasks. Since Golda is an elder, his decision must be respected. Golgotha permits Davy to remain, but warns he will smash his skull if he misbehaves. Davy calmly assures him he will remember the warning. Later, Davy observes the sword, towering 2 meters high and 30 centimeters wide, resembling more an ornament than a weapon. Dwarves attempt repairs by reheating iron and striking it with hammers. However, Perselk notices Davy studying something else and asks what caught his eye. Davy states bluntly that the sword cannot be restored. He explains it was forged through a process akin to that of a holy sword, yet because it was incomplete, it could not endure. He regrets it. He accepts that this outcome was inevitable. Golgotha continues hammering the blade with relentless focus. Watching him, his brother advises taking a pause before exhaustion sets in. Even Davy realizes their current approach will not succeed. Amid this tension, another band of dwarves arrives. They belong to the Blackrock tribe, and their chief Thors declares that the Yellowstone dwarves will ruin the sword entirely. Thors remarks that Golgotha is doing well for someone who once damaged a sacred relic, adding he never approved of him overseeing it. He insists it is not too late to entrust the blade to Blackrock, claiming their craftsmen would manage it far better. Yellowstone elders counter that even Blackrock's finest smiths would struggle to mend it. Thors fires back that they are deluded, pointing out they have labored over it for ages without any real results, and as a result, they could end up ruining it beyond recovery. He further explains that the elders of the remaining tribes have agreed the blade must be removed from Yellowstone, as such a relic cannot remain in unreliable custody. After all, matters would not have deteriorated this way had the Gord brothers' father still been alive. Those remarks leave Golgotha looking utterly defeated. That, Thors announces that there is nothing else worth discussing. He declares he will claim the sword for his own tribe, regardless of Yellowstone's objections. At that moment, Davy intervenes. He questions whether Golgotha can truly call himself a master craftsman. Thors sneers, suggesting Golgotha must be finished if he has befriended a human and brought him into the central forge. Golda quickly urges Davy to stand aside and avoid entangling himself in this dispute. Davy counters that a genuine master senses the spirit within every creation and treats each one with reverence. Yet he argues that Golgotha abandoned that principle from the very start. Without hesitation, Davy grabs the hammer and strikes the sword himself. The dwarves gasp, convinced the weapon is now beyond salvation. Few rush forward, trying to drag the human away before he worsens their predicament. Davy calmly asks Golgotha if he sincerely wishes to resolve this crisis. Golgotha affirms he does, and Davy responds that pride alone will never mend what is broken, especially not when this blade has safeguarded their humble village for 3 millennia. Rather than honoring an artifact that fulfilled its role, Golgotha is forcing his own will upon it in a desperate attempt to restore it. Davy insists that a relic which once upheld the village deserves dignity, and anyone ignorant of that truth cannot claim the title of master, even though he stands before craftsmen renowned across the continent. In his view, the dwarves still fail to grasp that the sword is beyond repair. He then lifts the blade with both hands and hurls it directly into the roaring furnace. As the flames engulf it, he reflects that every masterpiece carries a living essence. No one deserves the title of master without honoring that essence. Surtur once said that anyone bold enough to scorn such a spirit should be crushed without mercy. Instead of striking anyone down, Davy chooses to consign the sword to the fire. They can only watch as it is swallowed by the blazing heat. Several furious dwarves shout threats against the prince's life. Davy maintains that, given the blade's condition, this was the only fitting course of action. He adds that they must stop dishonoring a sacred creation, especially one forged by his own master, tying it personally to him. Further claims that none of them truly comprehend what defines a sacred relic. According to him, the sword's spirit faded long ago, and the dwarves lack the courage to forge something new. He challenges them, asking if they are truly proud to call themselves master artisans. Enraged, the dwarves demand to know who he is to lecture them so boldly. Golgotha cuts through the rising argument, remarks that their outrage only makes them appear more foolish. Davy senses that the elder has begun to accept that the sword's life has ended. Continuing to repair it would accomplish nothing. Though they realize they lack the ability to recreate it from nothing, they refuse to admit defeat, clinging to the belief that its meaning lies in generational inheritance. Now, however, they start to see that this mindset is flawed. Thors argues that the prince speaks so boldly only because the blade holds no significance for humans. He claims even the finest dwarf could not reproduce a legendary relic and warns Davy not to be arrogant, as no human could achieve such a feat. Perselk observes he has never witnessed the obstinate dwarf so unsettled. Davy firmly tells Thor he is mistaken to assume he cannot forge a legendary item. At once, every dwarf present stares at him in stunned disbelief. Even Perselk is left without words. Some whisper that not even among dwarves does such mastery exist, making a human's claim utterly unbelievable. They insist that only Surtur ever possessed that level of skill. Davy retorts that they may continue their empty talk or watch him work and learn firsthand. That declaration, he begins forging before their eyes. Among the many lessons from his master, one technique stood above the rest and allowed him to command numerous other skills. Surtur's guidance shaped him profoundly, granting him vast knowledge. Still, he admits he has yet to surpass his teacher's mastery. What matters is that he has forged many blades, some even superior to the dwarves' sacred prototype. Observing closely, Thors notices Davy blending cadmium steel with mithril alloys and immediately orders him to stop. Davy answers that unlike them, he is not bound by rigid conventions. He argues their so-called rules do not limit him, and that innovation has no ceiling if one dares to alter perspective. Techniques can be combined in new ways to produce unprecedented results, regardless of dwarven traditions. Dwarves watch in disbelief at his unconventional methods. After working for some time, a newly forged blade takes shape. Davy presents it, remarking casually that the process was simple. They realize he reforged the old blade's material into a new weapon, and its brilliance leaves them speechless. Davy believes this new sword far surpasses the former in strength. Perselk commends him, and Davy replies that abandoning narrow thinking opens limitless possibilities. He emphasizes that texture is the essential factor. The blade naturally draws in mana, circulating it throughout like the mana circle etched upon his own body. He then asks Elder Golgotha if he recognizes the technique employed. Davy explains that only rare items can regenerate without external mana, unlike ordinary artifacts that fail once depleted. Perselk remarks that despite initial chaos, Davy has earned the dwarves' respect. Davy adds that while he initiated the forging, he will not complete it, just as the ancient smith who first shaped it left the finishing to dwarves, though Golgotha admits their skills fall short. Davy simply tells them they must strive to improve. The elder immediately asks if he will instruct them, and Davy agrees on the condition it is not without compensation. He suggests they begin once his current undertaking is finished. Several dwarves are genuinely awed by his blades. Perselk warns he might be accused of sacrilege, but Davy replies his stigma shields him from such concerns. He seeks Golgotha's opinion, and the elder admits uncertainty. Davy clarifies that he did not originally craft these swords, yet he intends to apply the final refinements himself. The dwarves note that the smith responsible died long ago. Davy acknowledges this, explaining that prolonged storage has amplified their power more than tenfold. This mana refinement method, a blade must age deliberately to grow stronger, so the new sacred sword must rest for months before completion. This presents a challenge, as he is unsure how to finalize such pieces. Lacking essential materials, he considers requesting them from the central forge, which was his true aim in coming. Golgotha consents and grants him unrestricted access to the forge and its supplies. He admits his own shortcomings, but trusts the prince's exceptional talent. Davy knows lending a personal forge is highly unusual among blacksmiths, proving the dwarves sincerely wish to learn his craft. Any lingering doubt vanishes at that moment. Golgotha returns carrying a particular object. Perselk wonders aloud if it is a bone. Davy reveals it is no ordinary bone, but one from an ancient dragon of unknown origin. Golgotha declares it their most treasured heirloom, preserved through generations because none possess the skill to use it. Davy's eyes light up, astonished to encounter dragon bone in this forge. Another dwarf raises a concern. He warns that granting both the dragon bone and the elder's personal forge might spark conflict. Offering his own forge instead, he urges Davy to use whatever materials he requires. Soon, several dwarves begin arguing over who will assist the prince in this endeavor. They start presenting different rare materials and treasures to the prince, insisting that they too possess ancestral relics worthy of contribution. After a while, the protagonist finds himself standing before a mound of assorted resources. Perselk asks if he now has everything required, and Davy confirms with gratitude toward the dwarves. Golgotha expresses a desire to assist further, but reminds him that blacksmiths are bound by certain traditions. Regardless, he allows the prince to work freely and decides to review the forging methods Davy has shared so far. With all preparations complete, the protagonist is ready to begin. Memory surfaces of Miss Bean once raging, eager to vent her fury upon Davy. Surtur, however, had questioned the reason behind her irritation toward the boy. The Hall of Heroes resembled a heavenly sanctuary, shaped by the heroes, subconscious as their eternal resting place. Through Odin's power of dragon creation, Davy once had the opportunity to handle a mysterious dragon bone. Surtur had truly angered the goddess of mages. He had incorporated a dragon into the forging of the sacred blade, a choice that deeply upset Miss Bean. Instead of scolding Surtur, she blamed Davy for supervising the ritual in his master's stead, leaving him skeptical about sacred relics and doubting their existence. The present, however, he admits his earlier doubts were mistaken. He plans to infuse the weapon with fire-resistance enchantment, fully aware that even the slightest error would cause the blade to liquefy. Perselk observes every step with keen attention. He finds the entire transformation mesmerizing. The crimson blade, once deep red, now gleams like a flawless ruby. Meanwhile, the blue sword shines like a stellar explosion, as if resonating directly with Davy. Beyond their visual change, Perselk notices the intense focus radiating from Davy. The protagonist remains fully aware of the consequences of failure, yet he trusts his expertise. After relentless refinement, successfully completes both blades. Once the forging is done, Davy decides the swords deserve proper names. When Perselk inquires, Davy replies the names came to him the moment he saw them. He proclaims that they shall henceforth be known as Azure and Karmazim U. He then inspects their updated properties. Perselk jokes that the names lack inspiration, highlighting Davy's poor naming sense. Still, he is far more intrigued by the weapon's capabilities. Davy chooses to test the Karmazim blade first. Perselk asks what exactly he intends to do. Davy answers that he is merely testing its edge. Once, a whetstone placed nearby begins to dissolve. Perselk notes that Davy barely moved, yet the stone split cleanly in two. He then turns to testing Azure. This time, he does not strike a physical object. Nevertheless, Perselk realizes the blade has severed the mana suspended in the air. Davy confirms the result, explaining Azure was designed to slice what lacks physical form, and he marvels at its excellence. With everything settled, he prepares to depart. Outside, several dwarves await him. Davy asks about their purpose. They explain they guarded the area to prevent interruptions during his work. They reveal he had remained inside for 4 consecutive days without eating, which caused concern. Despite their knocks, he never answered, and Perselk remarks that Davy became utterly absorbed in the task. Still, he found watching the process fascinating. When Davy asks why, Perselk avoids the question, and the dwarves request to see the completed blades. Upon seeing them, some dwarves are moved to tears, as though beholding a holy relic. Such a reaction is natural given their devotion to craftsmanship. Witnessing a true masterpiece come to life stirs deep emotion. Weeks later, Davy begins instructing them, passing on all Surtur taught him about weapon forging. He also demonstrates how merging mana with metal enhances the outcome. Davy must exercise patience, as the dwarves' methods are rather coarse. Refinement he teaches demands precision and subtlety. Once they set aside pride, their enthusiasm multiplies, and some appear as eager as novices holding a hammer for the first time. Seeking respite, Davy steps outside for fresh air. Golgotha joins him and invites him to share a drink. He explains this brew is milder and more suitable for human taste. He clearly intends to discuss another matter. Davy anticipates the topic and apologizes for damaging the whetstone. Golgotha dismisses it, stating he knows Davy's true aim included securing dwarven support for his territory. He declares that dwarves always repay their debts. Though less skilled, Golgotha pledges assistance in whatever the prince requires. Feeling indebted, he promises the entire Yellow Rock tribe's cooperation. He even swears by the Iron God to stand with Davy when needed. Davy concludes that his objective there has been fulfilled. Shortly afterward, a dwarf arrives urgently seeking the elder. He reports an intruder hiding within the village. Golgotha reacts in surprise, but before they can respond, an object is suddenly hurled toward him. Davy swiftly intercepts it, preventing harm to the elder. He identifies it as a crimson dagger and finds the situation suspicious. Meanwhile, within the queen's chambers, her son Carlos fumes with anger toward Davy. Ever since their encounter, he lost his hair and uncontrollably mimics animal sounds. Each time he speaks, grotesque noises escape his mouth. Able to restrain himself, he vents rage on people and objects, convinced Davy is responsible. The misfortune began immediately after their last meeting. His maids suffer the brunt of his temper. Believing they mock him in secret, he assaults them mercilessly. He accuses them of disrespecting him as well. His uncontrollable fury drives him to extremes. As a result, innocent individuals are harmed. Unbeknownst to him, someone observes the chaos with amusement. Carlos demands the Watcher reveal himself. Stranger calmly says he has yet to introduce himself. Approaching calmly, he startles the maids and introduces himself as Pace, urging the prince to remember the name. Aware of Carlos's recent frustrations, he hints at possessing something valuable to offer. Pace then reveals his true nature as a vampire. He further shows that Shirley has been captured and held captive by him. Shocked, Carlos demands to know his purpose. Pace explains someone has tricked Carlos, but promises to rectify it. Without delay, he removes the strange affliction. Prince's bizarre noises cease instantly, and Pace calls it a small favor. Though uncertain of Pace's identity, Carlos listens as he is told not to concern himself. Pace insists they form a contract so he can eliminate the human Carlos despises. Tempted yet cautious, Carlos notes his half-brother bears a stigma and has protection. Pace dismisses this, reminding him Davy remains merely human. Carlos questions whether Pace himself is human, and the vampire hints the truth will reveal itself. He adds that one of his subordinates has already been dispatched to deal with Davy, and by now, he likely should have already finished off the prince. Returning to the protagonist, he evades the incoming assaults and quickly realizes the knives hurled at him are anything but ordinary. Perselk reaches the same realization almost instantly. Davy identifies the weapon as a blood blade, aware that only one particular race wields such power. In the distance, he spots the creature and senses that it possesses multiple blood-based techniques. Such abilities originate from vampires, who absorb blood essence and convert it into strength. The dwarves tremble at the sight of the terrifying being. Unlike them, Davy feels a thrill at encountering a powerful foe who sought him out, eager to study its nature. In the midst of the tension, the creature activates its power. The display only deepens the dwarves' fear. The monster gathers energy for a strike, then releases a violent surge of force. The blast tears into the earth with devastating impact. Dwarves are hurled backward by the shockwave. Davy immediately conjures a protective barrier to shield them. Moments later, the creature closes the distance and stands directly before him. He finds the enemy's behavior puzzling. Even so, his curiosity outweighs caution. and he accepts that battle is the only way to learn more. The injured dwarves retreat from the front lines. Meanwhile, Davy squares off against the foe alone. The monster locks its gaze onto him without flinching. Davy remarks mockingly that it seems lively enough, sarcastically asking if it believes itself a true predator. At once, he detects a dense aura of blood surrounding it. He knows that only elite vampires can wield such energy, meaning this adversary ranks at least at expert tier. Purcell cautions him, noting the creature far surpasses ordinary magical beasts. Davy remains calm, replying that even so, it is merely a beast driven by instinct. The creature roars as Davy advances. In response, Davy strikes, launching it high into the air. The monster fails to counter in time. Seeing the opening, Davy deems it the perfect moment. With the enemy airborne, he channels magic and summons the Crimson Blade. Scarlet's sword emerges from a dimensional portal. He remarks that one must ride a horse to test its speed, just as a blade proves itself only in battle. He unleashes a flurry of strikes, leaving the monster completely defenseless. A memory surfaces of Murim's peak era, when corrupt officials suppressed warriors and brought famine upon the people. Davy once stood before the man who united Murim beneath a single blade. He recalls thinking the legendary figure looked like nothing more than a drunken wanderer. Nevertheless, that master left behind 88 distinct sword forms. Together with the sword god Harris, he refined them into a style uniquely his own. Returning to the present, Davy comments that a warrior always requires proper tools. Observing the enemy recoil from the damage, he concludes the blade's quality is exceptional. Purcell warns him not to relax, as the creature still lives. Davy realizes its abilities mirror those of a lich, with an immortality core hidden nearby that allows endless regeneration unless destroyed. Alternatively, the creature would perish if its body were shattered beyond recovery. Exposure to immense sacred energy could also end it, though that method is hardly simple. Davy asks if she knows how a beast could gain immortality comparable to a high vampire, noting that wielding blood energy unnaturally suggests outside interference. Understands that uncovering the truth will not be easy. Since the creature revives, its core likely came from a vampire lord, yet he wonders why such a being would empower a demonic beast. Discovering the full reason seems complicated, so he decides to eliminate the threat swiftly. He switches to the Azure Blade to destroy the core, but Purcell warns that it may fail because the creature can disrupt even system balance. Davy finds that puzzling, since the swords could slay even divine beings. Given their long maturation and immense strength, he doubts any foe could resist them. Still, he chooses to reflect on that later. Now, the battle demands focus. Spotting movement, he knows the enemy is repositioning. He strikes first and taunts it to conceal itself better next time. Suddenly, a vampire appears, lunges at him without warning. Almost instantly, it regrets the assault, realizing it stands no chance. Davy pursues relentlessly, forcing it into panicked retreat. He has no intention of allowing escape. Wielding the Crimson Blade, he hurls debris to cut off its path. The stones seal every route of retreat. Davy treats the chase almost playfully. He even muses that observers might mistake him for the villain. The vampire, confused by his words, focuses solely on fleeing. Each attempt to escape is swiftly intercepted. The vampire is stunned by Davy's overwhelming speed. Beyond blocking escape, Davy coldly remarks that he cannot leave after causing such chaos. He strikes again, and the vampire narrowly avoids a fatal blow. Even so, a deep wound proves he faces no ordinary human. The vampire considers himself noble among his kind and superior to mortals. Yet this human shows no fear, even after defeating a beast and treating the duel like sport. He realizes Pace gravely underestimated the prince. Now abandoned and vulnerable, he has no master to rely upon. Concludes Davy is far from an average human. Worse still, he cannot mount any counterattack. Eventually, Davy subdues him and orders him to stay still. The vampire insults him as inferior and demands his intentions, but Davy calmly says he seeks answers, while the vampire insists his kind reveals nothing to humans. Davy responds that he never planned to rely on voluntary confession. He possesses magic capable of probing another's mind directly. He is fully aware of vampire resilience. Still, he believes no secret is beyond his reach. Activating interrogation flame magic, he extracts the information he desires. Vampire feels searing fire consuming his body. In agony, he begs for the flames to cease. Purcell remarks that even for an enemy this feels harsh, but Davy assures her the vampire will survive. She clarifies she worries not for the foe, yet Davy admits he rarely spares those who attempt to kill him. Purcell understands, but still feels uneasy. Davy comments that her heart is too soft. He adds he only needs limited information and wishes to conclude swiftly. Sobbing in despair, the vampire struggles to speak yet endures stubbornly. Davy asks if he desires more of the burning torment. Terrified, the vampire introduces himself as Pedkid, a viscount. Davy states he knows he was the true target and asks if the attack relates to the incident with the vampire maid. Pedkid confirms it, and Davy notes how cooperative he has become compared to his earlier defiance. He then presses further, demanding to know why both Pedkid and the magical beast possess immortality. The vampire wavered, clearly reluctant to respond to that inquiry. Seeing this, the protagonist considers pushing him a bit further. Frustrated, Pedkid suddenly declares he would rather die than reveal the truth. Davy instantly senses something is wrong. He realizes the vampire is bound by a curse preventing him from speaking. Pedkid's body begins to bloat unnaturally, on the verge of detonation. Within moments, he turns into a living bomb and explodes, taking his secrets with him. After the blast, Davy explains that the vampire did not act of his own will, but was triggered by the curse. He adds that he never expected to gain much information anyway. Feeling responsible, Perselk apologizes, but Davy reassures her she did nothing wrong. He clarifies that when a curse breaks, its caster can sense the disruption. That means the vampire's master now knows their subordinate has perished. Davy also realizes that the curse he placed on Carlos has been removed. Since his spell was intentionally difficult to dispel, someone capable must be orchestrating these events. Therefore, he concludes the mastermind must be formidable. Back in the dwarf village, reconstruction efforts are underway. Perselk notes that the beast tore through this area before pursuing Davy, causing widespread destruction. The protagonist sees the dwarves mobilizing tirelessly to repair the damage. He decides to visit the elder. Golgotha apologizes for the chaos that occurred. Davy asks whether he sustained any injuries. The elder replies he is unharmed, though many structures were ruined and a few villagers suffered minor wounds. Still, Davy senses something amiss. He feels the elder is holding back words. Golgotha invites them inside for a private discussion. Once inside, Davy mentions the numerous sentinels outside and asks what happened. The elder says it is not serious, only that a child vanished from the orphanage. The guards are searching, but have yet to locate the child. Golgotha also worries the village may no longer be safe for the prince. Davy replies that he, too, has something to disclose. He hands them a notebook detailing how to restore the sacred item, explaining it will require considerable time. He notes he will depart soon, which is why he prepared these instructions. The elder insists they cannot repay him, but Davy says he expects nothing, as he owes them instead. After all, they helped him complete his swords. He reveals the magical beast targeted him, not the dwarves, so once he leaves their troubles should cease. He apologizes for the turmoil he brought. Davy reflects that they could have blamed him entirely if they wished. Instead, they supported him, prompting him to reveal his stigma. He only worries that vampires might attack after his departure, though he cannot prevent it now. Before leaving, he searches for the missing child. He finds the child hiding within a tree. He feels obligated to repay the dwarves' kindness. Now he can depart with peace of mind. Later, he sets off toward home. At the gates of Hin's territory, things appear quiet. Suddenly, a caravan breaks the calm. Guards request identification. Davy informs them the visitors are companions of their lord. Recognizing him as their saint, despite his denial, they welcome him home. Upon returning to Hines, he is overwhelmed by tasks, as the population has grown during his absence. Ordinarily, this would be problematic, but he has brought reinforcements. He had explained everything to Golda, who admitted the situation was unstable, even within the Lord's mansion. Golda sees this as repayment and vows to transform the territory into a haven worthy of a master blacksmith. He states a leader must first secure his own residence, so he will renovate Davy's home before tackling larger projects. Davy shares additional ideas he believes the dwarves will appreciate. Lone Miter wonders how Davy persuaded dwarves, known for isolation, to accompany him. Despite lingering questions, Davy feels reconstruction progresses smoothly. Later, he retires to his newly prepared chambers. He jokes that battling beasts would be simpler than administrative duties. He finally understands why Josian kings lived such short lives. Perselk reminds him leadership is demanding and asks if he plans to sleep without changing. Davy admires the softness of the new alchemically crafted bed instead. He senses something unusual. Despite the bed's size, someone else occupies it. That individual seems displeased by his presence. Davy instantly feels he has stepped into trouble. Alarmed, he wonders if he entered the wrong room, then concludes there must be an intruder. With the territory expanding rapidly, incidents of trespassing have increased. Some have even bribed guards to approach his quarters. He recalls a master warning him about entanglements with women and threatening consequences. That reminder makes him wary of promises from a corrupt saint. Though many tried bribery, he never accepted their advances. Eventually, he resorted to threats against those sneaking in. He simply wanted undisturbed rest after long days. But somehow, someone succeeded in entering. To his shock, it is a child, leaving him confused about her identity. The girl calmly introduces herself as Kaya. Both Davy and Perselk realize this situation is serious. Anger surges within Davy. He suspects an enemy is using a child to manipulate him. Furious, he summons Amy. Housekeeper arrives promptly. She asks what her lord requires. Davy demands an explanation for the child's presence, reminding Amy she was instructed to bar all entry. Amy cautiously asks whether he brought the child back himself. He denies it, concluding someone secretly placed her there. He calls the situation unacceptable. Amy apologizes for her oversight and escorts the girl away. She promises to investigate immediately. Suddenly, Kaya looks at Davy and calls him daddy. Both adults freeze in shock. Amy's surprise causes her to loosen her grip. Kaya runs straight toward Davy. She wraps her arms tightly around him. Davy remains bewildered by being called father. This confusion marks only the beginning of his troubles. Moments later, he is startled again. Another girl appears, this one visibly timid. Later, Kaya darts around the room, while Amy struggles to supervise her. After examining her status, Davy realizes Kaya is the human form of the Crimson Sword, and the other girl embodies the Azure Blade. He was baffled as to why the two of them had assumed the shapes of human children. Perselk commented that Davy's conscience must have taken a hit, considering the awful names he gave them. Davy shot back that worrying about that now was pointless. This outcome caught Davy off guard, yet he realized the swords had gained awareness and were calling him father since he was their creator. Even so, he stressed that none of it had been his intention. At the same time, Amy handed Kaya a cookie. Observing this, Davy questioned whether swords even required food, as though one surprise wasn't already enough. The second girl then walked up to Davy. She hadn't chosen a name for herself. Davy kept referring to her as Azure. In response, the girl addressed him as Daddy. Davy felt his heart might burst from the overwhelming adorableness. After some time passed, he called the two girls over, inquired whether they were able to revert to their former state. Azure and Crimson grasped what he meant immediately. They combined their strength at once, shifted back into their blade forms. Perselk observed that they returned to being swords without a second thought, and Davy remarked that the change appeared almost automatic. Moreover, the energy contained within the blades felt denser than before, implying that their newfound consciousness had actually enhanced their power. Afterwards, he permitted them to take on their human appearances again. At that moment, he wondered whether he should make this matter known publicly. Perselk reminded him that the girls were essentially his daughters. Davy clarified they were adopted in name, and worried such a fact might complicate any future marriage prospects. As he debated his next move, Amy stepped forward to inform the prince of something. He declared that someone had just come to see him. Davy questioned how a visitor could arrive without notice, and the housekeeper confirmed it was true. She then disclosed that the guest was his sister, Princess Winley. The moment she entered, Winley was captivated by the children, and she immediately asked her brother to explain who the girls were. Davy answered that they were daughters he had taken in. Winley was genuinely astonished upon hearing that. He laughed that every time she met him, he seemed to have something new going on. She admitted she had been anxious when he left for such a harsh land, but felt relieved to learn he had built a business and was thriving. In addition, she noticed dwarves in the town upon arrival and was thrilled, since she believed dwarves rarely ventured outside their settlements. Davy explained they were cooperating for mutual benefit, and added he wished he could host her properly, though everything was chaotic at the moment. She replied that it didn't matter and that seeing her brother happy was enough, mentioning she understood how occupied he was. Davy agreed inwardly, realizing he truly was enjoying himself. He then welcomed Winley into the house, while still keeping an eye on his household. Amy guided the rest of Winley's entourage elsewhere. The protagonist sensed something unusual about it, but chose to let the housekeeper manage the visitors for now. Once inside, Davy asked how she managed to visit despite her busy duties, and she explained that nighttime raids had decreased, so Varys had grown relatively calm. Compared to his land, Varys lacked excitement. In truth, Winley admitted she had come for a different reason. She asked whether her brother understood how to wield the power of a stigma. She believed that no matter how busy he was the only person she could rely on. For that reason, she sought his assistance. Seeing tears in his sister's eyes, he realized she was facing serious trouble. He immediately assured her he would help however he could. Not long after, exhaustion overtook Winley and she drifted off. Davy was aware that Varys lay far from Hinds, so the journey must have drained her. She had ridden for days with barely any rest simply to speak with him. Winley explained that a close friend was near death, and both healers and clergy had abandoned hope. Davy remembered that Patna served as Winley's companion and personal guard, and had been struck by a poisoned arrow while shielding her. His sister had fallen into an ambush by bandits, and if Patna had not intervened, the arrow might have hit Winley instead. A priest cleansed the toxin from Patna's body. Strange markings soon began spreading across her skin. On top of that, her body started exhibiting unusual symptoms. As a result, she endured immense suffering and was gradually wasting away. In desperation, Winley concluded that ordinary priests could not cure her friend and decided to seek someone with greater power. That led her to Davy, whose stigma she believed made him the only one capable of saving Patna. Davy vowed to try everything within his power, and after shedding many tears, Winley eventually succumbed to sleep. Since that moment, he had not stepped away from her bedside. Children came closer, and Kaya wondered aloud if Winley was ill. Davy reassured her that she was simply tired and needed proper rest, so he intended to let her sleep. However, Kaya refused to leave because she had already grown fond of Winley. Herself found it touching that the girls showed such affection towards someone they had just met. The protagonist felt the same warmth in his heart. Without noticing, he was beginning to accept the role of a father, reflected that he would usually send them away, yet their lively presence beside Winley might actually aid her recovery. Later on, he reconsidered the symptoms Winley had described. When Purcell asked what troubled him, he replied that the signs felt familiar, and he sensed an impending issue, though he couldn't pinpoint it. Afterwards, he instructed the butler to contact the most reputable guilds within his domain. Davy remarked that matters were likely to grow complicated, and he wanted contingencies in place. Purcell commented that it didn't sound overly alarming, since Davy often turned crises into advantages. Davy acknowledged that, but feared a surge of similar cases because the symptoms reminded him of only one particular disease. Purcell questioned whether any illness truly caused bloody coughing, along with blue blotches across the body. Davy answered yes, though not on this continent, which was why he felt uneasy and puzzled about its source. The following day, Winley was laughing and playing with the children. Watching from afar, Davy reflected that every cause inevitably brings about an effect. The injured knight had received healing magic immediately after the poisoned arrow struck, yet soon displayed bizarre symptoms no physician recognized. Purcell observed that Davy appeared troubled. Davy admitted he had been preoccupied with many thoughts. His companion then wondered where the border raiders had obtained such a lethal toxin. Davy suspected something, but said it was premature to conclude anything, so further inquiry was necessary. Purcell asked if that was the reason he summoned the Intelligence Guild, and Davy confirmed it was. He explained that understanding the root of an illness was key to curing it, a principle he had learned during his medical training. Soon after, he sensed someone nearby and commented that their arrival was perfectly timed. He invited the hidden observer to step forward without hesitation. Purcell asked whom he was addressing. Davy gestured toward a figure in disguise ahead of him and told them not to stall. The cloaked individual stated they had heard the prince required assistance. Davy acknowledged this and expressed appreciation for their coming. Noticing the visitor's caution, he chose to speak plainly. He declared that he wished to purchase information and was willing to pay generously, fully aware that nothing in the world was free. Stranger replied that with sufficient compensation they could supply intelligence even from neighboring realms, whether personal or political. Davy inquired about any knowledge concerning the princess of the Farron Empire, and Purcell remarked he need not bargain like a trader. Nevertheless, the informant asserted they would risk their life to gather what was requested, so the answer was affirmative. Davy stated he would speak frankly. He then set the agreed payment upon the table. He explained that a knight named Patna served as his sister Winley's guard, and that he wanted every detail about her recent movements and background. At the same time, he noticed through the merchant's status that the informant was Ina Helishana, a dark elf. The elf then asked if their task was simply to investigate that woman's history. Davy wondered aloud if the assignment he had given was excessively demanding. Ine responded that they would not take the payment up front. Davy questioned her reasoning for that decision. Ine explained they preferred to receive compensation after finishing the job, prompting Davy to ask what she would do if he refused to pay afterward. The elf understood Davy's dry humor and knew he was not someone who broke promises, so she was confident he would honor the deal. Davy sensed that despite her caution, Ine was trying to build a relationship, and he considered that a positive sign. He asked whether this arrangement had been suggested by her guild, and she admitted it was entirely her own choice. During that, Davy accepted the terms without further objection. In an instant, Ine disappeared in a puff of smoke. Davy commented that she could have simply walked away normally. He then noticed that Ine Helishana had deliberately concealed the fact that she was female. Moreover, her alias was Echo, a renowned figure known across the continent for flawlessly completing missions. Purcell asked what significance the surname Helishana held, as it seemed to pique his curiosity. Davy dismissed it as unimportant and told him not to dwell on it. 2 days later, as Davy prepared for departure, his sister insisted on accompanying him, but he reminded her that her friend's life was at stake, and she needed to remain behind until things were settled. He firmly advised Winley not to act stubbornly. The trip would be lengthy, and additional companions would only slow them down. Time was critical, and he wanted her to conserve her strength since traveling by horse was exhausting. Davy felt an uneasy premonition about her joining them, while Purcell remarked it was more than mere intuition. Even so, Winley refused to back down. Their argument was interrupted when someone suddenly appeared. It turned out to be one of Winley's attendants, who inquired about the commotion. Winley explained that her brother was refusing to let her travel with him. Purcell observed that this was exactly the concern Davy had mentioned earlier. Ulysses stepped forward, introducing himself as a fifth-rank mage affiliated with the Red Tower, though such an association seemed unusual for someone of his standing. Davy responded with his own introduction, mentioning he was already familiar with Ulysses' reputation. Despite the mage's polite manner, Davy felt uncomfortable meeting him under these circumstances and saw little reason to prolong the exchange. Regardless of Ulysses' fame, he was still tied to the central magic tower, which gave Davy no desire to befriend him. Ulysses remarked that this land was far from modest, calling it the most remarkable territory in the eastern continent. He added that Princess Winley had praised the region so highly that he became curious enough to visit. Winley hurriedly told him not to speak that way in front of her brother. Even Purcell sensed Davy's jealousy intensifying and suggested he avoid hostility toward Ulysses. Davy had no intention of following that advice. In his understanding, Ulysses was hailed as the Red Tower's prodigy, undeniably talented despite his young age. He also possessed wealth, skill, and handsome features, essentially the perfect candidate with no visible shortcomings. What troubled Davy most was Ulysses' closeness to Winley, so he bluntly asked how they became acquainted. Ulysses explained that he encountered her while traveling to the Hines region and escorted her safely to this place. Davy thanked him politely, though inwardly he harbored murderous thoughts. The mage clarified that Winley had actually saved him from mountain bandits using her magic, and he felt indebted for her assistance. Then revealed his expertise in spatial magic, capable of opening a compact mana portal to send objects wherever he desired. Winley reacted with amazement, unlike her unimpressed brother. He noted that such portable portals were rare, and only an exceptionally skilled mage could wield such an item. Ulysses brushed it off as coincidence, explaining he was merely transporting the artifact to prevent it from being damaged. Winley marveled at his mastery of two magic types, unaware that her brother shared the same ability. Purcell pointed out that this talent could aid Davy, since long-distance teleportation posed difficulties for him. Though displeased, Davy ultimately conceded. He reluctantly agreed to accept the mage's assistance. Shortly afterward, the teleportation spell was activated. The trio arrived in the Kingdom of Veres. However, the atmosphere there felt disturbingly ominous. Purcell detected the odor of scorched flesh lingering in the air. Davy recognized it as the stench of burned corpses. Winley wondered if another invasion had occurred, confused since the bandits had only recently been driven away. In the confusion, someone identified Princess Winley. The man introduced himself as Count Lincoln of the Disease Treatment Corporation, saying he had been dispatched to care for her friend, and added that her beauty surpassed the rumors he had heard. Winley cut him off, insisting they had no time for pleasantries and needed to see her friend immediately. Count Lincoln replied that the matter would have to wait, and urged them to accompany him. Explained that the castle designated for the princess had been sealed off with a sacred artifact from the Holy Kingdom, and he would escort them there without delay. Upon arrival, the Count apologized for relocating the knights without consent, but claimed circumstances left him no alternative. Winley reminded him that her brother Barris ruled the territory, and in his absence she held authority. Count Lincoln acknowledged this, but stated his role within the Disease Treatment Corporation granted him exceptional authority, something she should already understand. Corporation for Disease Treatment operated under approval from the three emperors of the continent and wielded supreme power in matters of public health. Representing that body, the Count announced that a dreadful plague known as Demon's Blood had overtaken the territory. Those infected developed blue stains across their skin and coughed up blood, spreading the contagion to others nearby. Even so, Winley urged Davy to accompany her at once to see Patna. Count Lincoln, only now recognizing Davy, apologized and admitted he had long wished to meet him. Mentioned hearing of Davy's stigma and his prosperous trade in moomplant leaves. He claimed such blessings were no coincidence and suggested Davy was favored by fate. Winley grew impatient and declared that her friend needed immediate attention. She attempted to call for her butler. The Count informed her that all personnel had been placed in quarantine, given the disease's contagious nature. He had confined everyone who had interacted with the patient to prevent further spread. He added that he possessed direct authorization from the Queen, and in such crises, his authority overrode that of the local lord, since this was not an unprecedented event. He further declared the illness incurable, claiming even divine intervention would be futile. Nevertheless, he insisted that was precisely why his team was present, and urged the princess to entrust the matter to them, promising to return shortly with positive news. A makeshift treatment ward had been arranged, and Davy entered to assess the conditions, seeing numerous afflicted individuals. Realized the quarantine aimed more at containment than genuine healing, though it was a reasonable approach. Herselk remarked he had never witnessed something so dreadful, and the odor was suffocating. Meanwhile, Davy searched for Winley's companion. He soon located the first patient, whose condition was dire. After examining her, Davy concluded the cause traced back to a certain flower. He recalled it being known as the Tosta's flower, a rare species thriving in harsh climates and harboring potent toxins. Checking Patna's fever, Davy warned that her brain would overheat if this continued. Her body was dangerously unstable, her skin icy like a corpse while her internal organs burned. He had anticipated complications, but seeing her confirmed it would be far more complex than expected. What puzzled him most was how this illness had arrived on this continent. Davy identified it as a deadly virus he called melting acceleration. He explained that it once ravaged another world and had been engineered to differ from any known disease. Highly contagious, it had the potential to annihilate millions through a single carrier, and previously it took a decade to create a cure. Though many survived eventually, countless lives were lost before treatment was found. Davy declared he needed to produce antibiotics immediately before time ran out. He grabbed a scalpel from the nearby table and readied himself to begin the procedure. Before he could proceed, someone intervened. Baron Gornio, an official from the disease authority, stopped him and demanded to know why he was in the restricted zone. Davy introduced himself as Prince Davy, stating that his arrival should already have been reported. The Baron acknowledged he knew of the prince's arrival, but insisted the area was restricted even to royalty and requested that Davy withdraw. He explained that a widespread epidemic had broken out in the territory, and they had determined it was transmitted through the air. He urged the prince to cover his mouth and nose to avoid inhaling the infectious particles. Although aware that Davy bore a stigma, he stated it would not grant protection, noting that even a recently arrived high priest had fallen ill. At that moment, the Baron heard a patient shrieking in agony and demanded to know when his condition had deteriorated. Gornio ordered the staff to restrain the patient and administer a painkiller. A nurse quickly filled a syringe in preparation. Davy stopped them, warning that injecting it would cost the man his life. He requested to inspect the medicine vial. After examining it, he declared that the contents were the core of the problem. Davy ripped open the patient's shirt without hesitation, realized the virus had caused blood to accumulate in the man's lungs. If left untreated, it would inevitably lead to cardiac arrest. With swift resolve, he readied a scalpel, made an exact incision that immediately eased the patient's suffering. He did not stop there and continued performing further procedures. Even the surrounding nurses watched in astonishment. Davy remained completely absorbed in his work until Gornio interrupted, accusing him of ending the man's life. The Baron scolded him, saying a human life was not something to toy with. And he suddenly noticed a change. A nurse reported that the patient's pulse had stabilized. Gornio was stunned and realized the prince had saved the man rather than killed him. After finishing, Davy requested to borrow an item. He picked up one of the vials nearby. He instructed the nurses to control the bleeding and suture the wound, cautioning them never to administer painkillers to patients showing these symptoms, as it would prove fatal. He then stated that his task there was complete. Before departing, however, he turned to Baron Gorn. He explained that those marked with a stigma possessed immunity to illnesses. Thus, he could not be judged by the same standard as a high priest. Later, Davy returned to Winley's side. He felt displeased seeing her alone with Ulysses. Setting that aside, he asked about Barris, and Winley replied that her twin's situation was far from promising. Davy responded that conditions at the treatment facility were equally grim, though he believed the staff were trying their hardest. Ulysses mentioned he had obtained some useful information. He explained that 2 officials from the disease treatment center had been dispatched to Varys, Count Lincoln and Baron Gornio, noting that their noble titles were now merely formalities. Ulysses described the organization's structure, stating it had a president, 3 directors, and 15 officials, beneath whom served knights and physicians. Davy observed that the 3 directors were in fact the emperors themselves. The president was Valshaz, the Holy Kingdom's pope, and while physical injuries were manageable, this world was especially susceptible to plagues. The identities of the 15 officials were kept secret due to their exceptional medical skill and the fear of losing them. Given that authority came directly from the emperors and the pope, Count Lincoln's claims now seemed reasonable. At present they outranked royalty, and opposing them would equate to defying the 3 empires and the pope, branding anyone who did so a traitor. Even if people disliked the arrangement, they had no means to resist it. Furthermore, they were supported by the Knights of Destruction, led by Count Colio, formerly a royal knight from the eastern Randy's territory. Ulysses remarked that Colio had retired years ago, so his presence indicated the severity of the crisis, and he preferred not to meddle. Winley admitted that had she known how serious matters were, she would not have drawn them into it. Davy reassured her gently, telling her not to worry because everything would turn out fine. Then asked whether the situation troubled Ulysses at all. Ulysses answered that it did not, explaining that Patna was affiliated with the Red Tower, and as one of its elders he had reason to assist. Davy thought Ulysses appeared diligent, yet sensed hidden motives behind his involvement, and he concluded remaining at the treatment center would not help since he already had what he required. He stated that while the center focused on containment, his responsibility was to develop a cure before time ran out. Urselk asked how he planned to accomplish such a feat. Davy replied that the center had likely attempted similar measures, but relied on conventional methods, which led to failure. Urselk realized he intended to use the patient's blood, though the details remained unclear. Davy affirmed he had a strategy and inquired whether the elf was present. Ine Helishana emerged, remarking that he had located her once more. She complained that her stealth abilities never seemed effective against him. Nonetheless, she handed over the requested report, noting she had yet to receive compensation. He added that she brought additional information she believed would aid him. Davy teased that such generosity might tarnish Ine Helishana's professional image. She shrugged off the remark, claiming she was fully aware of her actions. Davy unrolled the scroll she had given him. He questioned whether the contents were trustworthy. After all, credibility was the lifeline of any informant. Therefore, if Ine Helishana vouched for its accuracy, he believed she was truthful. Davy mentioned he had another favor to request. He handed her a list of materials and asked her to procure as many as possible, confident she could handle it better than hired mercenaries. Instructed her to charge the expenses to the disease treatment center's account, causing Ine Helishana to hesitate. Davy argued that it was a matter of saving lives, and trusted she was not heartless enough to ignore that. He appealed to her sense of humanity and asked her to carry out the mission for the greater good.